Civilizations do not disappear all at once. They fade one memory at a time. A language is forgotten, a tradition is abandoned, a road is no longer travelled. Eventually only the stones remain. Thousands of years later, those stones become our only witnesses to worlds that once felt as real as our own. They cannot tell us what people believed, what they feared, or what they hoped to achieve. They simply endure, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. That is why the ancient world continues to challenge every generation. It is not a puzzle missing a few pieces. It is the surviving outline of entire civilizations whose voices have almost completely vanished. And every discovery brings us one step closer. Not to certainty, but to a deeper appreciation of how much has been lost. Munagua, hidden in the Sierra Morena of southern Spain, is not a Roman city that should have worked. About 50 kilometers northeast of Seville, near Villanueva del Rio y Minas, the ruins of Municipium Flavium Muniguense rise on a steep hillside instead of a flat plain. Most Roman towns were built for order: straight roads, level forums, predictable drainage, and wide urban grids. Munagua was different. It climbed a slope. It balanced temples, terraces, streets, baths, and retaining walls on unstable ground. And somehow, after nearly 2,000 years, parts of that engineered hillside are still standing. The site was known locally for centuries, but modern understanding began after its identification in the 18th century and later archaeological work, especially by German and Spanish researchers. What first looked like a hilltop fortress slowly revealed itself as something stranger: a Roman mining town transformed into a monumental terrace sanctuary. Munagua was not large. Its urban core covered only a few hectares. Yet its engineering problem was enormous. The city flourished mainly between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD, during the Roman control of Baetica. Its wealth seems to have come from the mineral landscape around it, especially iron and copper. That matters, because Munagua was not placed where life was easy. It was placed where resources were valuable. The Romans did not adapt the city to a comfortable landscape. They forced the landscape to carry the city. At first glance, the ruins look almost peaceful. Broken walls, grass, stone steps, fragments of temples, and the outline of a town swallowed by the hills. But the real mystery is not what has collapsed. It is what has not. The highest monument, the Great Terrace Sanctuary, was built on a slope so steep that any mistake in pressure, drainage, or foundation would have destroyed it. Its outer retaining walls were reinforced with 13 buttresses, not for decoration, but because the entire structure was fighting gravity. A retaining wall is one of the simplest structures to look at and one of the most dangerous to misunderstand. It is not just a wall, it is a machine that resists invisible force. Behind it, soil pushes outward. Rainwater adds pressure. Temperature opens cracks, roots widen them. If water is trapped, the force can multiply until stonework bulges, tilts, and fails. Modern engineers calculate this with soil mechanics, drainage models, and safety factors. Munagua's builders had none of that language. Yet they built a massive artificial platform on a hillside, and enough of it survived to make the question uncomfortable. How much did they really know? Compared with Pompeii, Munagua feels almost impossible. Pompeii sits on relatively manageable ground, and its streets spread across a volcanic plain. Compared with Timgad in Algeria, another Roman town famous for its grid, Munagua looks like the opposite of Roman logic. Timgad is geometry imposed on open land. Munagua is geometry forced into a mountain. Even compared with great Roman sanctuaries in Italy, its setting is unusual, because the terrace was not just a symbolic platform. It was the physical skeleton of the city's highest sacred zone. The survival of the retaining system suggests several layers of engineering working together. The walls were thick, the buttresses divided pressure into smaller zones. The terraces reduced the slope into steps, turning one dangerous incline into a sequence of controlled loads. This is similar in principle to modern hillside construction, where engineers break vertical pressure into staged retaining systems. But Munagar did it in stone, mortar and earth, without reinforced concrete or steel anchors. The most important hidden element may have been water control. A dry retaining wall can survive for centuries. A wet one can fail in a season. In the Sierra Morena, rainfall is seasonal, and storms can suddenly load the ground with water. If the terraces behind Munagua's walls became saturated, hydrostatic pressure would push outward with destructive force. That means the builders likely understood, at least practically, that drainage was as important as masonry. They may have used rubble packing, small channels, porous fill, and carefully sloped surfaces to move water away from the core. The mystery is that much of this system is either buried, lost, or only partially understood. What we see is the wall. What kept it alive may have been the invisible drainage behind it. This is where Munagua becomes more than a Roman ruin. It becomes a technical puzzle. A wall reinforced by 13 buttresses is not guesswork. It implies planning. It implies that the builders knew where the pressure would concentrate. It implies that they expected the hillside to move, breathe and absorb water. The sanctuary was not simply placed on the hill was rebuilt to receive it. The comparison with Inca terraces in the Andes is useful, even though the cultures were separated by an ocean and more than 1,000 years. In places like Machu Picchu, survival depended on drainage, retaining walls, and stone foundations that controlled mountain water. Munagua faced a similar basic problem: how to make a slope behave like architecture. The difference is that Roman engineers usually left texts, tools, and standardized urban patterns. Yet at Munagua, the exact design logic is still partly missing. We can see the result, but not the calculations. The sanctuary itself adds another layer of mystery. It was once faced with marble of different tones, turning a hillside structure into a monumental visual statement. From below, visitors would have seen a rising sequence of platforms, stairways, and walls, almost like a Roman answer to a stepped sacred mountain. This was not only engineering, it was psychological architecture. The climb transformed space into power. The higher a person moved, the more the city below became part of the spectacle. But building beauty on a slope is dangerous. Marble cladding adds weight. Temples add concentrated loads. Stairways cut through structural zones. Every opening, every corner, every change in height creates a possible weak point. The fact that the complex retained so much of its form means the builders were balancing appearance and stability with unusual skill. They were not just stacking stones, they were managing compression, lateral pressure, slope, water, and ritual movement in one design. Below the sanctuary, Munagua contained other urban features: a forum area, baths, houses, streets, and religious buildings. This creates another question. How did a small town justify such monumental construction? If Munagar's population was modest, the scale of the sanctuary seems disproportionate. The likely answer is mining wealth. Iron and copper extraction in the surrounding region may have financed a city that wanted to display Roman identity in stone. In that sense, Munagua was not merely a town. It was a statement. Rome could bring order even to a difficult mineral frontier. Yet the mining connection also raises unresolved technical questions. Ancient mining demanded its own engineering. Identifying ore veins, digging safely, removing water, ventilating shafts, transporting ore, and processing metal. Archaeological evidence shows industrial activity in and around the area, but the full operational system is not completely visible. If Munigua's wealth came from metal, then the city's architecture may have been supported by another hidden world underground. Mines, furnaces, workshops, and transport routes that have not survived as clearly as the sanctuary walls. There is also the strange matter of urban scale. Munigua was small, but its public architecture was ambitious. A city of only a few hectares did not need a massive terrace sanctuary for survival. It needed it for meaning. This makes the retaining walls even more fascinating. They were not built only to solve a practical problem. They were built to support ideology. The walls held up a sacred image of Roman power. And then, like many places in the Roman world, Munigua declined. By late antiquity, parts of the city changed function. Public buildings were reused, and some spaces connected to urban life appear to have shifted toward industrial or secondary use. This is one of the quietest mysteries of the site. The city was not wiped out in one dramatic catastrophe. It seems to have faded as mining, economy, administration, and regional priorities changed. The engineering outlasted the system that created it. What do you think was the real secret behind Munigua's survival? Share your theory in the comments below. In southwestern Luxembourg, near Petange and Differdange, Titelberg appears quiet today. But 2,000 years ago, this 50-hectare Celtic stronghold may have been one of the most technically advanced industrial centres north of the Roman world. The site was noticed by scholars in the early 20th century, but serious excavations began in 1968. What archaeologists uncovered was not just a hill fort, it was a layered city, Celtic below, Gallo-Roman above, with ramparts, streets, houses, workshops, ritual zones, coins, slag, and traces of metalworking that suggest a society far more organised than the old stereotype of barbarian Europe. Titelberg belonged to the Treveri, a powerful Celtic people living between the Moselle, the Rhine, and northern Gaul. The plateau was naturally defensive, rising about 100 metres above the Chiers Valley, and its oval surface measured roughly 1 kilometre long and 500 metres wide. Around it stood ramparts that in some places still reached about 9 metres high, while the defensive circuit was close to 3 kilometres long. Compared with Manching in Bavaria, which covered more than 300 hectares, Titelberg was smaller. Compared with Bibracte in France, another major Celtic oppidum, it was similar in political importance but more compact. Yet its mystery lies in something less visible than walls: industry. The strangest technical question at Titelberg begins with iron. Archaeologists have found evidence of metalworking, coin production, slag, furnaces, tools, and workshop zones. In the broader Latin world, iron production exploded between the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. Iron tools, nails, weapons, fittings, knives, agricultural equipment, and building fasteners became common at a scale that would have been impossible without organised production. A bloomery furnace needed temperatures around 1100 to 1250 degrees Celsius, high enough to reduce iron ore but not fully melt the metal. The result was a spongy bloom of iron mixed with slag, which then had to be hammered, reheated, cleaned, and shaped. That process sounds simple only on paper. In practice, it required ore selection, charcoal preparation, air control, furnace maintenance, and repeated judgment by eye, sound, smell, and experience. There were no thermometers, no written furnace manuals, no surviving Celtic engineering texts. Yet sites like Titelberg show that Celtic metalworkers could produce enough iron to support construction, warfare, trade, agriculture, and coin-related production. The real puzzle is not whether they could do it. They clearly could. The puzzle is how much of the production system has vanished. Industrial ironworking usually leaves ugly durable evidence. slag heaps, furnace bottoms, burnt clay, tuyères, charcoal layers, hammer-scale and failed blooms. Titelberg has metalworking evidence, but the complete operational picture remains incomplete. In many ancient industrial sites, furnaces were temporary structures. A bloomery might be broken open after a smelt to remove the bloom. Clay walls could collapse, be rebuilt, reused, or erased by later construction. At Titelberg, the problem is sharpened by the long life of the settlement. Celtic buildings were replaced by Roman stone structures. Streets were reorganized, workshops shifted. Later activity disturbed earlier layers. What survives may be only the shadow of a much larger industry. This is where Titelberg becomes more mysterious than a simple hill fort. If the Oppidum functioned as a major Treveri centre, iron was not a side craft. It was infrastructure. The ramparts themselves demanded huge quantities of material. The famous Murus Gallicus style of Celtic fortification used timber beams, packed stone, earth, and iron nails or clamps to bind the structure. Julius Caesar described such walls in Gaul, noting that their alternating wood and stone construction made them difficult to burn and difficult to batter down. In modern engineering terms, the wall behaved almost like a composite structure. Stone gave mass, earth absorbed shock, timber distributed stress, and iron fasteners locked the system together. But that also means the builders needed standardized iron parts in large numbers. A single defensive circuit nearly 3 kilometers long could consume enormous resources. Even if only parts of the wall used dense iron fastening, the demand for nails, spikes, tools, axes, wedges, saws, carts and repairs would have been constant. Compared with Roman military engineering, which is famous because it was documented by literate administrators, Celtic engineering is often reconstructed from scars in the soil. That silence makes it feel more primitive than it was. Titelberg suggests the opposite, a society capable of coordinating mining, forestry, charcoal burning, transport, smelting, smithing, construction, and defense across an entire landscape. The missing furnaces are therefore not just an archaeological inconvenience, they are the center of the mystery. If production was large, why do we not find a complete industrial district preserved like a blueprint? One possibility is that the most intensive smelting occurred outside the excavated areas, closer to ore, wood, or water. Another is that furnaces were rebuilt so often that their remains became fragmented. A third possibility is that later Gallo-Roman activity reused, leveled, or destroyed much of the Celtic industrial zone. In some cases, the clearest evidence of production may not be the furnace itself, but the waste trail, slag, hammer-scale, burnt clay, and chemical traces in the soil. The control of heat is another unresolved technical layer. A bloomery furnace works only when airflow and charcoal behavior are controlled with precision. Too little oxygen and the ore will not reduce properly. Too much and the furnace can overheat or waste fuel. The ancient smith had to read the color of the fire, the sound of the draft, the viscosity of slag, and the behavior of the bloom. This was not random craft. It was experimental knowledge passed through generations. At Titelberg, that knowledge likely existed inside specialist families or workshop groups, but almost none of the learning system survives. We see the products and waste, not the training. Compared with Mediterranean metallurgy, Celtic ironworking has often been underestimated because it lacked grand written records. But the archaeological numbers challenge that view. Across Latena Europe, iron objects multiplied dramatically. Fortifications required mass-produced nails. Farms needed sickles, plough parts, knives, and axes. Warriors needed swords, spearheads, shield fittings, and chainmail. Coin production required metal control at a different level. Alloy preparation, blank casting or cutting, die striking, weight standards, and visual authority. Tittelberg has evidence of coin minting before Roman rule, meaning the community was not merely consuming metal, it was controlling metal as a political language. The coinage is important because it shows standardization. A coin must be recognizable, repeatable, and trusted. Even when Celtic coins look stylized or strange to modernize, they were not careless objects. Their weight, metal content, and imagery had to communicate power. If ironworking gave Titelberg tools and weapons, minting gave it economic identity. The same settlement that processed ore and forged objects also participated in long-distance exchange. Roads connected the region toward the Moselle, the Rhine, Gaul, and beyond. This was not an isolated hilltop. It was a node in a network. The urban layout adds another layer. Titelberg was not a random cluster of huts. Excavations revealed residential zones, public or ritual spaces, roads, workshop areas, and later Romanized buildings with stone foundations and cellars. Some reconstructions show a public area of around 10 hectares separated by a ditch, suggesting planned space rather than accidental growth. After the Roman conquest, the site did not simply die. It was reworked into a Gallo-Roman vicus, with new streets and buildings, and occupation continued for centuries. That continuity matters. Roman builders often replaced local structures when they considered them useless. At Titelberg, they adapted the site, which implies that the Celtic infrastructure was already valuable. Iron production required vast charcoal, demanding forests, labour and logistics. Titelberg's resources helped, but coordination was key. Whether managed by elites, specialists or households remains unclear, though the system was clearly complex. Milreu Roman Villa, hidden beneath the quiet countryside near Estoril in southern Portugal, appears at first glance to be just another luxurious Roman estate. Yet beneath its elegant columns and weathered walls lies one of the most technically sophisticated villas ever built on the western edge of the Roman Empire. Nearly 2,000 years after its construction, archaeologists can map its structures, analyze its materials, and recreate its layout with lasers and 3D models, but some of its most impressive engineering secrets remain frustratingly incomplete. The greatest mystery is not why it was built, but how knowledge that once allowed ordinary craftsmen to construct such remarkable systems could disappear almost entirely. The ruins remained buried for centuries until fragments of marble, mosaics, and masonry attracted scholarly attention during the 16th century. Serious archaeological excavations began in the late 19th century and expanded throughout the 20th century, gradually revealing a vast villa covering several thousand square meters. Built during the 1st century AD and continuously expanded until roughly the 4th century, Milreu included residential quarters, baths, agricultural facilities, ceremonial buildings, water reservoirs, and one of the finest collections of Roman mosaics ever discovered in the Iberian Peninsula. Every new excavation solved one historical puzzle while exposing another. Water was the foundation upon which the entire villa depended. Southern Portugal experiences long, dry summers with annual rainfall averaging only around 500 to 700 millimeters, making reliable water management essential. Yet Milreu operated an elaborate hydraulic network that supplied baths, ornamental fountains, fish tanks, gardens, and domestic living spaces without any mechanical pumps. Roman engineers relied entirely on gravity, meaning every channel, pipe, and reservoir had to be positioned with extraordinary precision. Even a gradient error of only a few centimeters over dozens of meters could interrupt water flow completely. Archaeologists have reconstructed parts of the network, but the complete source of the water supply and the precise methods used to regulate seasonal fluctuations remain uncertain. Similar hydraulic mastery can be seen in Roman aqueducts such as the Pont du Gard in France, Yet Milrur accomplished comparable control on a much smaller and more complex domestic scale. Perhaps the most astonishing mystery lies beneath the surface of its pools, where colourful mosaics have survived conditions that should have destroyed them centuries ago. Unlike decorative floors protected inside dry buildings, these mosaics spent much of their existence submerged or constantly exposed to moisture. Fish swam above them while water continuously pressed against every layer of mortar beneath. Modern engineers understand that repeated cycles of wetting, drying, mineral deposition, and thermal expansion gradually weaken almost every construction material. Even contemporary swimming pools often require waterproof membrane replacement after only a few decades. Yet many of Milrur's underwater mosaics remain remarkably intact after nearly 18 centuries. Each image consists of thousands of tiny tesserae, many measuring less than 2 centimeters across, carefully arranged to depict fish, marine creatures, birds, shells, and geometric designs. Their survival raises difficult questions. The limestone cubes, marble fragments, and coloured stones are impressive enough, but the real mystery lies beneath them. Roman builders created multiple foundation layers using lime mortar, crushed brick, sand, and carefully graded aggregates. The waterproof mixture known today as opus signinum chemically reacts with water, producing durable calcium silicate compounds that continue strengthening over time. Scientists can identify the ingredients using X-ray diffraction, electron microscopy, and geochemical analysis, yet they still cannot reconstruct the exact mixing ratios, curing methods, moisture conditions, or craftsmanship that consistently produce such extraordinary durability across the Roman world. The problem becomes even more remarkable when compared with modern materials. Ordinary Portland cement introduced during the 19th century often develops significant deterioration within 50 to 100 years when exposed to salt water, freeze-thaw cycles, or chemical attack. Reinforced concrete bridges frequently require major structural repairs after only several decades, because steel reinforcement corrodes from within. In contrast, Milrur's mosaic foundations endured nearly 20 centuries despite earthquakes, groundwater movement, biological growth, root penetration, and the complete abandonment of the site. Similar long-lived Roman waterproof concrete has been documented in the ancient harbours of Pozzuoli and Caesarea, where volcanic ash dramatically increased durability. Milrur, however, lies far from the volcanic regions of Italy, forcing researchers to wonder whether local craftsmen developed alternative mixtures adapted specifically to Iberian materials. No written manual describing these regional formulas has ever been discovered. The precision of the mosaics themselves presents another puzzle. The images remain remarkably level despite centuries of ground movement. Large decorative floors extending across entire rooms require careful compensation for soil settlement, thermal expansion, and structural loading. Even slight differential movement would produce visible cracks or misalignment across thousands of tiny stones. Laser scanning shows that many sections remain surprisingly flat considering their age. This suggests Roman builders understood not only artistic design but also the mechanical behavior of layered construction systems at a level rarely associated with the ancient world. Heating technology inside the villa demonstrates another engineering achievement whose practical details remain only partially understood. Milrur possessed a hypocaust system in which hot air circulated beneath suspended floors supported by hundreds of small brick columns. Furnaces heated air that travelled through carefully designed chambers before rising inside hollow wall tiles to warm bathing rooms evenly. Modern computational fluid dynamics can simulate these systems, yet archaeologists still debate how Roman engineers determined optimal pillar spacing, airflow resistance, chimney dimensions, and fuel efficiency without mathematical models or modern measuring equipment. Maintaining comfortable temperatures while preventing smoke infiltration required careful balancing of countless variables. Equally mysterious is the quality control behind the building materials themselves. Every brick supporting the hypocaust endured repeated heating and cooling cycles that would quickly fracture poorly fired ceramics. Lime mortars had to cure at predictable rates. Stone blocks had to resist moisture while supporting heavy loads. Tile dimensions remained sufficiently standardized that components fit together across multiple construction phases spanning centuries. Such consistency implies organized production, skilled labor, and rigorous practical knowledge. Yet very little documentation survives describing how workshops maintained these standards across distant provinces of the empire. Milreux also reveals a surprising degree of architectural planning. Rather than growing randomly over generations, its baths, ceremonial temple, agricultural buildings, courtyards, pools, and living quarters formed an integrated complex. Water distribution, drainage, structural loads, sunlight, and circulation appear coordinated from the earliest phases of expansion. Surveyors accomplished this without satellite positioning, laser levels, or electronic instruments. Roman measuring tools such as the groma and chorobates are known from historical sources, but translating those simple instruments into such precise long-term planning remains difficult to fully explain. Cerro de la Cruz de Almedinilla, perched on a limestone hill in Córdoba province, southern Spain, does not impress visitors with towering temples or colossal walls. Instead, it presents something far more unsettling, an ordinary Iberian town whose engineering seems extraordinary. More than 2,200 years after its destruction, many of its artificial terraces, retaining walls and house foundations remain astonishingly stable. Archaeologists can map its streets, trace its homes, and reconstruct its daily life. Yet one fundamental question refuses to disappear. How did an Iron Age community, equipped with simple hand tools and local materials, create a hillside settlement that resisted gravity far better than many later constructions? The site first attracted scholarly attention during the 19th century, but systematic archaeological excavations began much later, particularly from the 1980s onward. Layer by layer, researchers uncovered an exceptionally well-preserved Iberian settlement dating mainly between the 4th and 2nd centuries BC. The city appears to have ended violently around the late 2nd century BC, likely during the Roman conquest of southern Iberia. Burned houses, collapsed roofs, broken pottery still lying on domestic floors, storage vessels, tools, and traces of daily activities remained almost exactly where their owners had left them. Like Pompeii, although on a much smaller scale, Cerro de la Cruz became a frozen archaeological snapshot of a vanished society. The first mystery emerges long before examining any individual building. The entire settlement occupies an uneven hillside, where natural slopes frequently exceed 20 degrees. Modern engineers understand that constructing on such terrain is never straightforward. Every additional wall increases horizontal pressure against the soil, while rainfall continuously destabilizes the slope. Even today, hillside developments require extensive geotechnical surveys, reinforced to retaining structures, drainage systems, and mathematical slope stability calculations before construction can safely begin. Yet, more than 20 centuries ago, the inhabitants of Cerro de la Cruz somehow transformed this difficult landscape into a remarkably organized urban environment. Instead of allowing buildings to follow the natural contours randomly, they created a sequence of artificial terraces cut directly into the hillside. Houses were aligned with surprising regularity, connected by narrow streets and stairways that climbed the slope in carefully planned stages. Each platform supported not only its own structures, but also the additional weight of terraces above it, This meant that every retaining wall became part of a larger engineering network, rather than an isolated construction. What continues to puzzle archaeologists is that the complete design philosophy behind these terraces remains poorly understood. Excavations clearly reveal stone retaining walls, compacted earth fills, and carefully prepared foundations, but they do not fully explain why so many sections survived while others disappeared. Unlike Roman engineering manuals, no Iberian technical texts have survived. There are no architectural drawings, no written formulas, and no instructions describing how builders determined wall thickness, foundation depth, or the correct angle for each terrace. Their knowledge vanished with the civilization itself. This uncertainty becomes even greater when considering soil mechanics. Modern geotechnical engineering explains that retaining walls fail primarily because of water pressure building behind them. As groundwater accumulates, lateral forces increase dramatically until walls crack, rotate, or collapse. Engineers therefore install drainage pipes, gravel backfills, geotextiles, or pressure relief systems to reduce hydrostatic loading. Cerro de la Cruz contains no obvious equivalent to these modern solutions, yet significant portions of its terraces remain stable for over 2 millennia. Some researchers propose that the builders intentionally layered different soil types, combining compacted clay with coarser stone fragments to improve drainage while maintaining stability. Others suggest that small gaps deliberately left between construction stones acted as invisible drainage channels, allowing rainwater to escape before dangerous pressure accumulated. Another possibility is that the natural limestone bedrock itself provided enough permeability to reduce groundwater buildup beneath the terraces. None of these hypotheses has been conclusively demonstrated. The archaeological evidence simply does not preserve enough information to reconstruct the entire system. The mystery becomes more striking when compared with other ancient hillside settlements. At Machu Picchu, sophisticated drainage channels and stone-filled sublayers have been identified beneath many terraces, allowing water to flow safely through the mountain. Roman cities often incorporated carefully engineered sewers and drainage infrastructure that remain visible today. Cerro de la Cruz, however, reveals far fewer obvious hydraulic features while still displaying impressive long-term stability. Whether this reflects a fundamentally different engineering solution or simply the disappearance of critical evidence remains unknown. Another unanswered question concerns surveying techniques. Creating dozens of nearly level building platforms across an irregular mountainside requires surprisingly accurate measurements. Even small deviations accumulate over successive terraces, eventually destabilizing the entire settlement. Modern construction relies on laser levels, optical instruments, and digital terrain models. Iberian builders possessed none of these technologies. They probably relied on ropes, wooden measuring rods, plumb lines, water levels, or carefully standardized units. But no physical evidence reveals exactly how such precision was consistently achieved. The settlement's remarkable degree of planning also raises broader social questions. The houses display repeated construction patterns, similar wall thicknesses, standardized room proportions, and coherent orientation across different neighborhoods. Such consistency suggests that experienced builders followed shared construction principles rather than improvising each project individually. Whether these standards were enforced by local authorities, transmitted through apprenticeship, or preserved within specialized construction guilds is impossible to determine. Yet the architectural uniformity strongly implies that sophisticated technical knowledge existed even if its written record has disappeared forever. Equally intriguing is the choice of construction materials. Most buildings combined locally available limestone, sun-dried mud brick, timber, and compacted earth. Individually, none of these materials appears exceptional. Mud brick in particular is usually considered vulnerable to rain, erosion, and structural failure. Nevertheless, many wall foundations and terrace systems endured for more than 21 centuries despite repeated seasonal weathering. Laboratory analyses of Iberian earthen construction elsewhere have demonstrated that slight differences in clay content, grain size distribution, moisture control during compaction, and organic additives can dramatically affect long-term durability. Whether the builders of Cerro de la Cruz possessed empirical recipes that optimize these variables remains an open question because the original manufacturing process cannot be fully reconstructed. The city's destruction adds another layer to the mystery. Archaeological evidence indicates an intense fire followed by rapid abandonment. Burned beams collapsed onto domestic floors, ceramic vessels shattered where they stood, and household objects remained scattered throughout the buildings. There is little evidence of organized evacuation or systematic recovery of valuable possessions. The event appears sudden enough to preserve an almost cinematic record of everyday life frozen in its final moments. Yet despite the settlement's advantageous defensive position and sophisticated infrastructure, it was never substantially rebuilt. El Cigaralejo, hidden near Mula in the region of Murcia, Spain, looks at first like another quiet Iberian ruin, but beneath its dry hills lies one of the strangest technical puzzles of pre-Roman Spain, a sanctuary, a necropolis, and hundreds of objects that suggest a society far more organized, skilled, and symbolically precise than its surviving record can explain. The site was brought to light in the 20th century through the long excavations of Emeterio Cuadrado Diaz. What emerged was not a single monument, but an entire ritual landscape, a settlement, a sanctuary on the slope, and a cremation cemetery where more than 500 burials were eventually documented. The chronology runs mainly from the late 5th century BC to the 1st century BC, a time when Iberian communities lived between local traditions, Mediterranean trade, Greek influence, Punic contact, and finally Roman pressure. The first thing that makes El Cigaralejo unusual is not size but density. In a relatively limited space, archaeologists found an extraordinary concentration of graves, offerings, weapons, pottery, ornaments, and animal figures. Some tombs were superimposed over earlier ones, sometimes in several layers, meaning this was not a casual cemetery. It was a place reused with memory, rules, and ritual planning. Compared with many Iron Age burial sites in Europe, where graves may be scattered across broad landscapes, El Cigaralejo feels almost compressed, as if generations deliberately returned to the same sacred ground, building identity layer by layer. The sanctuary adds the real mystery. Beneath its floor were offerings known as ex-votos, rings, ornaments, human figures, and above all, horses. Around 177 sandstone figures are recorded from the sanctuary, roughly 160 of them representing horses. That number matters. A few animal figures could be personal devotion. Dozens could be fashion. But more than 100 horse images from one sacred zone suggest a stable symbolic system, possibly linked to elite status, warfare, mobility, fertility, or a divine protector of horses and riders. In Iberian society, the horse was not just transport, it was power carved into animal form. Yet the deeper question is technical. How are these small objects made with such consistency? The stone horses are not monumental sculptures like the Greek Suchoi or Assyrian reliefs. They are smaller, more intimate, and easier to overlook. But their repeated anatomy, arched necks, tense legs, compact bodies, and controlled proportions suggests a visual grammar. The makers were not improvising each figure from nothing. They were following models, templates, workshop memory, or ritual standards that have disappeared. the bronze objects push the mystery further. Across Iberian sanctuaries, small bronze votive figures often reach only a few centimetres to less than 20 centimetres in height. Their scale is tiny, but the technical challenge is serious. To cast a small animal or human figure in bronze, the craftsperson had to control wax modelling, clay investment, alloy behaviour, furnace temperature, pouring speed, shrinkage and cooling. Bronze normally needs temperatures above 900 degrees Celsius to melt properly, and higher heat improves flow into narrow details. But too much heat increases oxidation and casting defects. Too little heat leaves the mould incomplete. In a miniature figure, a single block channel or air bubble can destroy the legs, ears, muzzle or reins. This is why the small bronze votives of Iberia are so intriguing. Their precision is not the precision of machines, but the precision of repeated hand-controlled process. A horse's leg might be only a few millimeters thick. An ear or tail may require the metal to move through an extremely narrow cavity before cooling. Modern metal casting still struggles with thin sections, trapped gas, and incomplete filling when the mould is small and complex. For an Iron Age artisan, success meant understanding the metal almost by instinct. When it was liquid enough, how fast it should be poured, how thick the wax should be, how much clay could hold without cracking, and where invisible air had to escape. The likely method was lost wax casting. In this process, the artisan shaped the figure in wax, covered it with clay, heated the mould so the wax escaped, then poured molten metal into the empty cavity. When the mould was broken, the bronze figure appeared. The idea sounds simple, but the execution is unforgiving. Every figure is a one-time event. If the wax model breaks, the piece is gone. If the clay shell cracks, the pour fails. If the alloy is too viscous, the extremities remain empty. If the cooling is uneven, the surface may distort. In other words, the finished object is not just art. It is the fossilized result of a successful thermal experiment. What remains unexplained is the missing industrial footprint. We have the objects, but not a complete map of the workshops that produced them. Where were the furnaces? How many artisans worked at once? Were the figures made near the sanctuary, in nearby settlements, or brought from specialized centers? Did worshippers buy them from craftsmen the way pilgrims later bought religious tokens? Or did elite families commission specific pieces? The sanctuary gives us the ritual deposit, not the factory floor. That gap is where the mystery lives. El Cigaralejo also forces a comparison with better documented ancient metalworking cultures. Greek bronze workshops produced large statues through sophisticated casting systems, often in separate sections. Roman artisans later standardized small metal goods across the empire. But Iberian votive bronzes belong to a different world. Local, small-scale, and often undocumented, yet technically capable. They show that high craftsmanship does not always require an empire. Sometimes it survives in regional sanctuaries, in objects small enough to fit in the hand. The metallurgy itself raises another question. Bronze is not a single material. Copper mixed with tin becomes harder and more castable. Lead can improve fluidity but may weaken the final object if overused. Even without modern chemistry, ancient metal workers learned recipes by color, sound, fracture, weight, and behavior in the crucible. At El Cigaralejo, the broader material culture suggests access to metal networks, weapons, ornaments, and tools. This means the community was not isolated. It was connected to mining, exchange, and technical traditions across southeastern Iberia, a region known in antiquity for mineral resources. But the exact knowledge system behind those recipes, how it was taught, corrected, and preserved, is almost invisible. The funerary side of the site adds another layer. More than 500 cremation burials indicate a society with repeated ritual control over fire. Cremation is not simply burning a body. To reduce a human body to bone fragments, pyres often need temperatures roughly between 700 and 900 degrees Celsius, sustained long enough for soft tissue to disappear and bone to calcine. This required fuel planning, airflow, placement of the body, and experience with heat. The same world that mastered funerary fire also handled ceramic kilns and metal furnaces. The mystery is whether these were separate traditions or connected branches of the same technical culture. Then there is the cemetery's social code. Some graves contained weapons, others contained ornaments, pottery, or imported goods. These differences suggest rank, gendered roles, age categories, or family identity. But unlike Egypt or Rome, El Cigaralejo left no long inscriptions explaining who these people were. Archaeologists must read society through material patterns, sword types, fibulae, urns, burnt textiles, grave depth, and placement. It is a civilization reconstructed through traces rather than texts. That silence makes the horse figures even more powerful. Why so many horses? In Mediterranean cultures, horses often marked aristocracy. In Iberian art, riders and horses appear in funerary sculpture and votive contexts, suggesting a link between elite identity, warfare, and sacred protection. But at El Cigaralejo, the repetition feels almost obsessive. The horse becomes a code. Was it a request for healing, a symbol of the dead, a military emblem, a sacred animal attached to a local deity whose name is lost? The objects remain, but the prayers that gave them meaning have vanished. Peña de los Gitanos, hidden 5 kilometers from Montefrio in Granada, Spain, looks like a quiet limestone landscape. But beneath its cliffs lies one of Andalusia's strangest prehistoric engineering puzzles. The site was not discovered in one dramatic moment. It was gradually recognized through caves, dolmens, carved stones, ceramics, flint tools, bone objects, and later archaeological surveys that revealed occupation from the Neolithic into the Middle Ages. Today, the area is protected as a cultural interest asset, declared in 1996. What makes Peña de los Gitanos unsettling is not simply that ancient people built tombs here. It is the way they shaped an entire landscape with stone, geometry, and weight. Thousands of years before metal tools, written plans, or modern surveying instruments. Across the site are caves, natural shelters, settlements, and megalithic burial zones. Some accounts describe around 100 megalithic burials distributed through the archaeological area, making it one of the most complete prehistoric landscapes in Andalusia. At first glance, the dolmens seem rough. They're not polished like Egyptian temples or perfectly cut like Roman masonry. But that is exactly where the mystery begins. These builders were not chasing decorative perfection. They were solving a structural problem: how to make irregular limestone slabs stand, lock, and survive under their own mass for more than 5,000 years. The most fascinating feature is the geometric precision hidden inside the apparent simplicity. A dolmen is basically a stone chamber. Upright slabs, a corridor, and a heavy capstone. But when the stones are studied as architecture rather than ruins, they reveal a surprisingly controlled logic. The side slabs are not randomly leaned together. The chamber walls often narrow, angle, or press inward in a way that helps distribute weight. The roof stone does not merely sit on top. It is stabilized by the relationship between vertical supports, side pressure, and the buried mound around it. This is not precision in the modern laser cut sense. It is prehistoric precision, the ability to use uneven stones as if they were parts of a calculated machine. A mistake of only a few degrees could shift the load, crack the roof, or cause the chamber to collapse over time. Yet many of these structures remain standing through rain, erosion, soil movement, and centuries of human reuse. The comparison with the dolmen of Menga at Antequera makes the problem even sharper. Menga, built around 3800–3600 BC, used stones weighing up to about 150 tons, with inward-leaning walls and a complex load distribution system that recent studies have linked to advanced Neolithic knowledge of geometry, geology and engineering. Peña de los Gitanos is less monumental, but it belongs to the same world of Iberian megalithic thinking, a world where stone was not just placed but engineered. The builders had no steel chisels, no cranes, no cement, no written mathematics, yet they understood something essential about force. They knew that a stone standing perfectly vertical could be weaker than a stone slightly inclined toward the load. They knew that a chamber buried under earth could gain stability from pressure around it. They knew that bedrock mattered. Many dolmens were not placed casually on soft soil but integrated into limestone terrain, where natural rock created a stable foundation. That choice is difficult to explain as luck. A dolmen must survive downward pressure from the roof, sideways pressure from the mound, water entering through joints, and seasonal expansion and contraction. If the ground is unstable, the entire structure shifts. If water collects under the supports, the stones sink. If the corridor is misaligned, the chamber becomes vulnerable. Peña de los Gitanos suggests that its builders had a practical understanding of geology, even if they had no formal word for it. The geometric question goes deeper. Why do some chambers seem to follow controlled axes? Why are certain stones selected for specific roles, while others are discarded? Why are corridors, chambers, caves, and natural passages arranged as if the whole landscape was being read like a map? The site is not a single tomb. It is a network of built and natural spaces with habitation zones, burial areas, caves, and defensive high points. The topography itself seems to have guided construction. This creates a strange possibility. The people of Peña de los Gitanos were not only building monuments, they were designing a ritual engineering landscape. The caves may have offered natural shelter, stable temperature, darkness, and symbolic access to the earth. The dolmens may have extended that natural cave idea into artificial stone chambers. In other words, prehistoric builders may have copied the logic of the landscape and rebuilt it in miniature with slabs. That would explain why the geometry feels both natural and artificial. The dolmens do not fight the terrain, they cooperate with it. Their builders may have watched how limestone cliffs cracked, how slabs fell, how water drained, how shadows moved across entrances, and how certain rock shelters stayed dry. Over generations, that observation could become a technical tradition. The unanswered question is how this knowledge was transmitted. A single dolmen can be explained by trial and error, but a landscape with many megalithic burials suggests repetition, memory, and planning. Someone had to know which stone could serve as a sidewall, which could bear weight, how deep to set the base, how to balance the capstone, and when the chamber was stable enough to be buried. That is not random labor, that is specialized knowledge. The absence of obvious workshops or written plans makes the mystery stronger. We can see the finished result, but not the full process. Were the stones shaped with hammerstones and abrasion? Were they moved on wooden sledges? Were earthen ramps used to raise capstones? Did builders use ropes made from plant fiber, timber levers, and counterweights? All of these are possible, but the complete method has not been recovered. And yet the physical evidence remains. Flint arrowheads, decorated ceramics, bone combs, caves with traces of occupation, and dolmens spread across the terrain show a community capable of more than survival. They could organize labor, remember measurements, choose stone, manage risk, and build for the dead in a way that outlasted the living by millennia. The strangest part is that Peña de los Gitanos does not look impossible. It looks simple enough to underestimate. But ancient engineering is often hidden in simplicity. A pyramid impresses because of scale. A Roman aqueduct impresses because of visible calculation. A dolmen impresses only when we realize how little margin for error its builders had. If one support stone leaned too far, the chamber failed. If the roof slab was too heavy for the sidewalls, it collapsed. If the floor was not stable, the monument twisted apart. If the earth mound trapped water, the structure decayed. To survive 5,000 years, the builders needed an invisible geometry, not drawn on paper but felt through stone, weight, slope and balance. So the real question is not whether these people had advanced technology in the modern sense. The real question is how a world without writing iron or formal architecture produced builders who could turn rough limestone into stable geometry and leave behind a landscape that still challenges engineers, archaeologists and historians today. In northeastern Spain, overlooking the Aguas Vivas river valley, lies Cabezo de Alcalá, an ancient Iberian city that should not have existed in the form we see today. More than 2,000 years ago, its builders transformed a steep limestone hill into a carefully engineered settlement whose technical sophistication still raises uncomfortable questions for archaeologists. Although local people had long known of the ruins, systematic excavations only began in the early 20th century, revealing an exceptionally preserved Iberian city buried beneath centuries of collapse. Layer by layer, archaeologists uncovered streets, drainage systems, temples, defensive walls, workshops and houses that painted a picture of a civilization whose engineering abilities were far more advanced than previously assumed. At first glance, Cabezo de Alcalá appears to resemble many other Iberian settlements scattered across the Ebro Valley, but the closer researchers examined the site, the more unusual it became. Unlike many hill forts that expanded organically over generations, this city seems to follow an intentional urban plan, where streets intersect at remarkably regular angles despite the uneven terrain. Residential blocks align with one another, public buildings occupy elevated positions, and water is directed through carefully designed channels beneath roads, making nothing about the settlement feel accidental. That level of planning becomes even more surprising when considering its date, as most of the city flourished between the 4th and 1st centuries BC, centuries before Roman engineering became fully established across Hispania, while during roughly the same period, Celtic settlements elsewhere in Europe often developed irregular street patterns dictated largely by topography, yet Cabezo de Alcalá instead displays a level of geometric organization more commonly associated with later Roman towns. The first mystery begins with the hill itself, as constructing an urban center on sloping ground presents enormous engineering challenges even today, requiring every building to account for changes in elevation, unstable foundations, rainwater runoff, and soil movement. Modern civil engineers solve these problems with surveying instruments, laser measurements, and computer models. Yet the Iberians possessed none of these technologies, and still the city displays surprisingly consistent alignments throughout its excavated areas. Archaeologists have proposed that wooden measuring rods, ropes, plumb lines, and simple leveling devices were sufficient, and while those explanations are certainly possible, they remain incomplete, because reproducing such precision repeatedly across an entire settlement without standardized surveying equipment requires remarkable expertise, and no written Iberian construction manuals survive to explain how surveyors transferred measurements across uneven slopes or maintained consistent angles over long distances. Water management introduces another puzzle, as excavations revealed stone-lined drainage channels running beneath several streets, carrying rainwater away from houses and public buildings, and even after more than 2 millennia, many sections still preserve gradients that would have allowed water to flow efficiently. Hydraulic engineers know that drainage systems require an extremely delicate balance, since if the slope is too shallow, water stagnates, and if it becomes too steep, erosion accelerates and structures deteriorate, making the maintenance of an appropriate gradient across an irregular hillside without modern instruments an impressive achievement. Similar hydraulic sophistication is celebrated at sites like Machu Picchu, where Inca engineers mastered mountain drainage, or at Petra, where the Nabateans controlled seasonal floods through dams and channels. Yet Cabezo de Alcalá receives far less attention, even though it demonstrates that complex hydraulic thinking was not exclusive to the largest ancient civilizations. The city's defensive architecture presents another fascinating question, as massive stone walls surround portions of the settlement. But they are not built simply from stacked blocks, since excavations reveal multi-layered construction in which large exterior stones create stable faces while smaller stones and compacted fill occupy the interior. Rather than acting as solid monolithic barriers, the walls behave more like engineered composite structures, distributing stress throughout multiple layers. Modern structural engineering frequently relies on composite materials because different layers absorb forces differently, and although the builders of Cabezo de Alcalá obviously understood nothing about finite element analysis, centuries of weathering suggest they intuitively recognized principles of load distribution that modern science would later formalize mathematically. Even more intriguing is what appears to be missing, as many surviving walls today resemble dry stone construction, giving the impression that enormous blocks were simply stacked without mortar, and for decades visitors assumed exactly that. Yet microscopic analysis has gradually challenged this assumption. Between many stones, archaeologists have identified traces of sediments, mineral residues, and microscopic voids, indicating that binding materials once occupied these spaces, meaning that much of the mortar has almost completely disappeared, and this nearly vanished mortar has become one of the site's greatest technological mysteries. Unlike Roman concrete, whose volcanic ash composition can still be analysed after 2,000 years, the binding material at Cabezo de Alcalá seems to have consisted largely of clay-rich mixtures, organic compounds, or weak lime components that gradually decomposed under centuries of weather exposure, resulting in a structure that appears dry today even though it may never have been originally. This creates a major problem for researchers, because if the original mortar has vanished, reconstructing the engineering methods becomes extraordinarily difficult, raising questions such as how thick each layer was, what ingredients were mixed together, whether straw was added to reduce cracking, whether plant fibers were incorporated to increase tensile strength, and whether builders deliberately chose a flexible binder instead of a rigid one to absorb slight movements caused by seasonal expansion and contraction. Yet no surviving written source answers these questions. Experimental archaeologists have attempted to recreate Iberian mortars using combinations of clay, lime, crushed ceramics, sand, ash, and organic fibers, with some mixtures producing reasonable strength, while others weather rapidly, but none can yet be confidently identified as the exact formula once used at Cabezo de Alcalá. The disappearance of the mortar may itself explain why the walls have survived, since modern rigid cement often cracks when structures shift, whereas flexible earthen mortars, although weaker individually, sometimes tolerate movement better by allowing stones to redistribute stress naturally, similar to concepts seen in Inca masonry, where tightly fitted stones survive earthquakes, not because they resist movement, but because they accommodate it. Though whether the builders of Cabezo de Alcalá intentionally designed for flexibility remains unknown. The mystery deepens further because standardized construction appears throughout the city, as doorways often share comparable widths. Wall thicknesses repeat from house to house, and building techniques remain remarkably consistent across different neighbourhoods, suggesting either a highly organised guild of professional builders or construction rules passed through generations with surprising accuracy. Yet, almost nothing is known about Iberian engineering education, as no workshop manuals exist, no architectural treatises survive, and unlike Roman authors such as Vitruvius, Iberian builders left virtually no technical literature, causing their knowledge to disappear with the communities that practiced it. Evidence also suggests sophisticated domestic water collection, as several houses incorporated cisterns and channels capable of capturing seasonal rainfall from rooftops, and in the semi-arid climate of northeastern Spain, where annual rainfall averages roughly 400 to 500 millimeters. Efficient rainwater harvesting could determine whether an entire settlement flourished or failed, requiring every channel to be carefully positioned and every storage basin to be properly waterproofed. Yet the exact waterproofing methods remain uncertain because organic sealing compounds rarely survive archaeologically. La Alcudia of Elche in Alicante, southeastern Spain, looks quiet today, but beneath its dry soil lies one of the strangest technical puzzles of ancient Iberia. The site became famous in 1897 when a young worker uncovered the Lady of Elche by chance at La Alcudia, the ancient city of Ilitzi, later transformed into the Roman colony Iulia Ilitzi Augusta. At first, the discovery seemed to be about art. A limestone bust, a solemn face, two enormous wheel-like ornaments beside the head. But the deeper archaeologists looked, the less this place seemed like a simple ancient settlement. La Alcudia was occupied for centuries, from Iberian times through Roman and Visigothic phases, with streets, walls, houses, drains, kilns, burials, and sacred spaces stacked one above another like a buried machine. Its most famous object, the Lady of Elche, is now in Madrid's National Archaeological Museum, but her greatest mystery may not be her identity. It may be the technology that once made her alive in colour. Today, most people see the Lady of Elche as pale stone. That image is misleading. Scientific studies have shown that the bust was originally polychrome. Her eyes were filled with vitreous paste, and traces of pigment still survive on the surface. Tests have identified materials such as Egyptian blue and natural vermilion, with a preparation layer containing gypsum and calcium carbonate. This means the sculpture was not meant to be a cold white statue. It was engineered as a coloured, shining, almost living presence. That is where the mystery begins. Egyptian blue was not an ordinary pigment. It was one of the earliest synthetic colours in human history, produced by heating a mixture of silica, copper, calcium, and alkaline flux to high temperatures, often around 800 to 1000 degrees Celsius. In Egypt and the Eastern Mediterranean, it was already famous centuries earlier, but finding it on an Iberian masterpiece raises a difficult question. Did La Alcudia import the pigment, import the knowledge, or produce similar material through local workshops connected to Mediterranean trade? Vermilion is even more problematic. Natural vermilion comes from cinnabar, a mercury sulfide mineral. It gives a powerful red colour, but it is chemically sensitive and toxic. To use it well, ancient artisans had to understand grinding, layering, binding, and surface protection. Too coarse, and the colour would look dull, too fine, and it could darken or react. If exposed badly after burial, it could change again. The Lady of Elche preserves only fragments of this lost surface technology, like a burned page from a technical manual. Compared with Greek marble sculpture, which was also painted, the Lady of Elche feels more mysterious because the Iberian technical tradition is far less documented. Greek and Roman polychromy can be compared across hundreds of statues, temples, and written references, but Iberian sculpture leaves fewer surviving clues. There is no workshop manual from La Alcudia, No ancient recipe says how the pigments were mixed. No record explains whether the colours were symbolic, political, religious, or purely visual. The science can identify minerals, but not the full process. The stone itself adds another layer. The bust was carved from porous limestone, probably easier to shape than marble, but harder to finish cleanly without damaging fine detail. The surface had to receive pigment evenly, meaning the artisan likely used a preparation layer before painting. This is comparable to a painter priming a canvas, but on sculpture the challenge is greater. The layer must grip stone, hold colour, follow carved details, and survive handling, humidity, burial, and chemical change. The fact that traces remain after more than 2,000 years suggests a controlled procedure, not casual decoration. The vanished colour also changes the interpretation of the face. In plain stone, she appears silent and funerary. With painted skin, red details, blue elements, and glass-like eyes, she would have looked startling. The cavity at the back has led some scholars to suggest a funerary function, possibly as a cinerary urn. If true, then this was not only sculpture, it was a ritual object engineered to hold remains, reflect light, display colour, and project status. In that case, the technical skill was inseparable from belief. Around her, La Alcudia itself presents the same pattern: visible remains, missing systems. The ancient city stood in a semi-arid region where water was never guaranteed. Yet occupation continued through long periods, implying some level of water control. Archaeologists have found drains, wells, channels, and hydraulic structures, but the whole network remains incomplete. Some sections disappear beneath later Roman construction. Others were damaged or reused. The question is whether the Romans introduced the main hydraulic system, or whether they adapted an earlier Iberian infrastructure already sophisticated enough to support an urban centre. This matters because Roman engineering is well known: aqueducts, sewers, baths, roads, concrete, surveying. But Iberian engineering is harder to reconstruct. If La Alcudia already had organised drainage, water storage, or planned streets before Roman domination, then the city was not simply Romanized into complexity. It already possessed a technical base. The Romans may have expanded it, standardized it, or monumentalized it, but the original intelligence may have been local. The urban layers are another clue. La Alcudia was rebuilt repeatedly. Iberian structures were covered, leveled, and reused by later phases. Roman streets and buildings sat over earlier remains. In many ancient cities, this kind of layering produces chaotic settlement mounds. But at La Alcudia, parts of the urban organization seem controlled enough to suggest planned rebuilding. Leveling old occupation layers, stabilizing foundations, and keeping usable alignments required practical surveying. Not laser precision, but consistent measurement with cords, sighting tools, water levels, and trained builders. This is where La Alcudia can be compared with Pompeii or Italica. Pompeii gives us a frozen Roman city, suddenly preserved by volcanic disaster. Italica shows planned Roman urbanism on a grand scale. La Alcudia is different. It is not one frozen moment, it is a technical palimpsest, one city rewritten over another, where the earliest rules are partly hidden below later ones. That makes the archaeology harder, but also more intriguing. Every wall may be both a structure and a clue to a previous system. The ceramic evidence points in the same direction. La Alcudia produced and used large quantities of pottery, storage vessels, tableware, amphorae, painted ceramics, and everyday objects. Good pottery requires controlled firing. Clay must be selected, shaped, dried, stacked, heated, and cooled without cracking. Oxidizing and reducing atmospheres change color. Kiln temperature affects hardness. A difference of only a few dozen degrees can alter the result. Yet many ancient kiln systems remain fragmentary, making it difficult to reconstruct the full production chain. If pigments, ceramics, sculpture and hydraulic works all existed in the same urban environment, then La Alcudia was not just a settlement, it was a technical ecosystem. Stoneworkers needed tools, painters needed minerals, potters needed fuel and kilns, builders needed lime, clay, timber, water and labour. Surveyors needed shared measurements. Traders brought materials and ideas across the Mediterranean. The real mystery is not whether one artisan was talented. It is how knowledge was organised, transmitted and protected. The Lady of Elche stands at the centre of this lost system. Her colour technology is especially haunting because it is visible only through scientific residue. Modern methods such as Raman spectroscopy and X-ray fluorescence can detect minerals at microscopic levels, but they cannot fully recover the human decisions behind them. What binder was used? Egg, gum, animal glue, wax, a mixture? How many layers were applied? Were colours polished after drying? Were they renewed during rituals? Did the blue and red follow symbolic rules known only to Iberian elites? Even modern reconstructions are uncertain. A digital restoration can show possible colours, but not the exact brightness, texture or surface finish. A laboratory can reproduce Egyptian blue, but not necessarily the ancient artisan's local recipe, furnace conditions, fuel impurities, grinding size or mixing sequence. The original effect may have depended on details too small to survive. Brush marks, organic binders, varnish, smoke exposure, ritual handling, and the angle of Mediterranean sunlight. Beneath the modern resort town of Vila Moura, on Portugal's southern Algarve coast lies Cerro de Vila, a Roman settlement that rarely appears on lists of the world's greatest archaeological sites. Yet beneath its quiet ruins is evidence of an engineering system so sophisticated that it functioned almost like an industrial complex nearly 2,000 years ago. Here, luxury villas stood beside warehouses, fish processing facilities, baths, docks, freshwater reservoirs, and an organised network of roads, creating an economic machine that supplied products across the Roman Empire. The ruins are not mysterious because they are impossible to explain, but because many of the technologies that kept this coastal settlement operating so efficiently remain only partially understood. The site remained buried for centuries until archaeological excavations during the 20th century, particularly after modern development began around Vila Moura in the 1960s, revealed an unexpectedly large Roman complex dating primarily from the 1st through 4th centuries AD. Excavations uncovered mosaic floors, residential buildings, bathhouses, fish salting tanks, warehouses, wells, canals, and traces of what had once been a busy harbour. Together they painted the picture of a prosperous maritime settlement occupying several hectares, strategically positioned along trade routes linking Lusitania with North Africa, Hispania, Italy, and the wider Mediterranean. One of the first puzzles appears before examining any building. Cerro de Vila sits only a short distance from the Atlantic coastline, where fresh water is notoriously difficult to secure because seawater easily contaminates underground aquifers. Modern coastal engineers often rely on sophisticated hydrogeological surveys, pumping stations, and monitoring systems to prevent saltwater intrusion. Yet Roman engineers managed to sustain permanent baths, domestic water supplies, industrial production, gardens, and a growing population for centuries. Archaeologists have identified numerous wells, cisterns, drainage channels, and water storage installations throughout the settlement, but the complete hydraulic system has never been reconstructed. It remains uncertain whether the Romans relied entirely on local freshwater lenses, imported water through now-lost channels, or developed a hybrid network that carefully balanced multiple sources. Whatever solution they adopted, It worked remarkably well despite the site's vulnerable coastal setting. Even more intriguing is the harbour itself. Ancient Roman texts describe extensive maritime commerce along the Algarve, while excavations at Cerro de Vila uncovered warehouses, imported ceramics, amphorae from different regions, and clear evidence of commercial shipping. Yet today almost nothing resembling a harbour survives above ground. Geological studies indicate that coastal processes over nearly 2,000 years dramatically altered the shoreline through sediment deposition, erosion, and changes in sea level. What was once an active waterfront has gradually disappeared beneath layers of sediment and shifting wetlands. Archaeologists can identify fragments of quays and waterfront structures, but the complete design remains elusive. Without knowing the original coastline, researchers cannot fully determine how Roman engineers protected ships from Atlantic storms, controlled sediment accumulation, or maintained navigable channels. Similar questions surround ancient ports such as Ostia in Italy and Caesarea Maritima in Israel. Yet Cerro de Vila presents the additional complication of a coastline that has transformed almost beyond recognition. The greatest engineering mystery, however, lies inside what at first glance appear to be simple rectangular stone tanks. These structures form the heart of an industrial fish processing operation that may have operated continuously for generations. Roman fish sauce, known as garum, was among the empire's most valuable commercial products. Premium varieties sold for extraordinary prices, transported in sealed amphorae across thousands of kilometers. Producing garum was far more complicated than merely leaving fish to rot. Different species required different concentrations of salt. Fermentation periods varied from several weeks to many months. Temperature had to remain relatively stable. Excess liquid needed to drain efficiently, and contamination could ruin entire batches. At Cerro de Vila, archaeologists discovered multiple processing tanks built with striking consistency in size, layout, and waterproof construction, suggesting standardized production rather than household preservation. The organization of these installations resembles an industrial production line centuries before the Industrial Revolution. Fishing boats unloaded their catch near the harbor. Fish could then be sorted, salted, fermented, inside carefully engineered tanks, transferred into amphorae, stored in nearby warehouses, and finally loaded back onto ships for export. Every stage occurred within a compact and highly organized complex. Such logistical efficiency is comparable in principle to later industrial food processing facilities, even if the technology itself remained entirely mechanical. Estimates from comparable Roman fish salting factories suggest that individual production centers could process several tons of fish during peak seasons, requiring enormous quantities of sea salt, skilled labor, standardized containers, and strict coordination between fishermen, craftsmen, merchants, and transport networks. Yet one essential question remains unanswered. We understand what these tanks produced, but not precisely how Roman builders engineered them for decades of continuous use. Their waterproof lining survives in many sections despite almost 2 millennia of exposure. The mortar appears to combine lime with crushed ceramic fragments, creating hydraulic properties similar to those found in Roman marine concrete. However, laboratory analyses indicate that local raw materials often differed significantly from those used around Rome or the Bay of Naples. This suggests regional adaptation rather than a universal recipe. Modern material scientists continue studying Roman mortars because some exhibit remarkable durability compared with ordinary Portland cement, whose service life often ranges between 50 and 100 years before significant deterioration. Certain Roman hydraulic concretes have remained structurally stable for nearly 20 centuries, demonstrating chemical processes that researchers are only now beginning to understand through microscopic and mineralogical analysis. The fish processing complex also raises broader questions about Roman industrial management. No surviving technical manual explains how production schedules were organized, how fermentation quality was monitored, or how workers ensured consistency across hundreds or perhaps thousands of amphorae leaving the site. Unlike modern factories equipped with thermometers, chemical sensors, and automated quality control, Roman producers relied entirely on accumulated practical knowledge. Their expertise existed largely in skilled hands rather than written formulas. When the political and economic structures supporting the Western Roman Empire collapsed during the 5th century, much of that specialized knowledge appears to have vanished alongside the trade networks that sustained it. Equally impressive is the settlement's drainage infrastructure. Industrial production generated wastewater, while seasonal Atlantic rains threatened flooding. Excavations reveal underground drains, channels, and carefully graded streets, directing water away from residential and industrial areas. Some sections maintain gradients so subtle that water could flow naturally without mechanical assistance. Roman surveyors achieved these alignments using simple instruments such as the chorobates and groma, yet the precision rivals gradients still employed in modern gravity-fed drainage systems. Because large portions of Cerro da Villa remain unexcavated beneath surrounding urban development, archaeologists have yet to reconstruct the entire network, leaving unanswered how the settlement balanced freshwater supply, wastewater disposal, and stormwater management simultaneously. Villa of Augustus is a Roman imperial villa buried beneath the modern town of Somma Vesuviana on the northern slopes of Mount Vesuvius in southern Italy. Hidden beneath volcanic deposits for nearly 2,000 years, the site presents one of the most intriguing technological mysteries of the Roman world. Archaeologists can identify the walls, measure the rooms, and reconstruct portions of the building, yet many of the engineering techniques that allowed the complex to survive repeated volcanic disasters remain only partially understood. The greatest mystery is not who lived there, but how Roman engineers created a structure capable of enduring conditions that would destroy many modern buildings. The villa was discovered during archaeological investigations that began in the early 2000s beneath several meters of volcanic deposits. Excavations revealed an enormous elite complex covering thousands of square meters. The discovery attracted international attention because some researchers proposed that the structure may be connected to Emperor Augustus, who died in AD 14. Whether or not Augustus himself occupied the villa, the scale of the architecture clearly indicates an imperial-level residence. Buried beneath layers of ash, mud, and volcanic debris, the complex preserved evidence of engineering knowledge that still raises questions today. The first mystery concerns survival. Mount Vesuvius is one of the most dangerous volcanoes in Europe. The famous eruption of AD 79 destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum, but later eruptions continued to reshape the surrounding landscape for centuries. The villa at Somma Vesuviana endured multiple volcanic events, including the massive eruption of AD 472. Geological studies indicate that several meters of volcanic material accumulated above parts of the structure. Modern engineers know that volcanic deposits can exert tremendous pressure on walls and roofs. Wet ash becomes even heavier, often reaching densities exceeding 1,000 kilograms per cubic meter. Under such loads, many buildings collapse, yet significant portions of the villa remain standing. Archaeologists have documented walls exceeding 1 meter in thickness, carefully bonded with Roman concrete and stone masonry. The remarkable preservation raises an important question. Did Roman builders intentionally design the structure to withstand extreme environmental stress, or was its survival simply the result of over-engineering? Modern structural analysis suggests that the distribution of weight through arches, vaults, and thick load-bearing walls played a critical role. However, researchers still debate how Roman architects determined these proportions without modern mathematics, computer simulations, or structural engineering software. The second mystery involves Roman concrete. Samples recovered from the villa demonstrate the use of the famous Roman construction material known as opus caementicium. This concrete incorporated volcanic ash from the Campanian region, lime, and aggregate. Modern laboratory analysis has revealed something extraordinary. Unlike ordinary Portland cement, which often deteriorates within decades under harsh conditions, Roman concrete can continue strengthening over time through chemical interactions between volcanic minerals and groundwater. Studies comparing ancient Roman concrete with modern equivalents have found that certain mineral crystals develop inside microscopic fractures. These crystals can partially seal cracks before they expand into major structural failures. Some Roman harbour structures have survived almost 2,000 years of exposure to seawater. The villa appears to preserve evidence of the same technological tradition. The mystery is whether Roman builders understood the chemistry behind these materials, or whether centuries of experimentation accidentally produced one of history's most durable construction technologies. To appreciate the scale of this achievement, consider a comparison. Many reinforced concrete structures built during the 20th century require major repairs after 50 to 100 years. The villa's masonry has endured earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, weathering, and nearly 2 millennia of burial. Even with modern materials science, researchers are still studying Roman concrete in hopes of developing longer-lasting sustainable construction methods. The third mystery concerns water management. Excavations revealed sophisticated hydraulic features, including channels, storage systems, drainage networks, and water control installations. Roman engineers understood that water was both essential and destructive. A poorly designed drainage system could undermine foundations, flood storage areas, and destabilize walls. The villa's hydraulic network appears carefully integrated into the architecture itself. The challenge becomes even more remarkable when considering the local environment. The slopes of Vesuvius experience intense rainfall, rapid runoff, and periodic geological instability. Yet the villa operated successfully for decades, perhaps centuries. Modern survey equipment allows engineers to calculate gradients with millimeter precision. Roman builders relied on simple instruments such as the chorobates and groma. How they consistently achieved the necessary accuracy across large construction projects remains a subject of fascination. The fourth mystery is the heating system. Evidence suggests that parts of the villa employed hypercourse technology, one of the most advanced climate control systems of the ancient world. In a hypercourse, furnaces generated hot air that circulated beneath raised floors and through hollow wall spaces. The result was a form of central heating more than 500 years before similar systems became common in Europe. Creating an efficient hypercourse required sophisticated understanding of airflow, heat transfer, fuel consumption, and architectural planning. Rooms needed carefully positioned vents. Floors had to be elevated on hundreds of small pillars. Temperatures had to remain comfortable without damaging structural materials. Modern engineers can model these systems using computational fluid dynamics. Roman engineers achieved functional results using practical experience alone. Exactly how this knowledge was standardized and transmitted across generations remains unclear. The fifth mystery involves logistics. The villa was not a simple country house. Archaeologists uncovered monumental spaces, storage facilities, decorative architecture, and evidence of large-scale economic activity. Constructing such a complex required enormous quantities of stone, timber, brick, tiles, and concrete. Tens of thousands of individual building components had to be produced, transported, and assembled. Historians estimate that large Roman construction projects sometimes involved hundreds or even thousands of workers. Materials moved through supply networks extending across the Bay of Naples. Yet surprisingly little documentation survives explaining how these operations were coordinated. Without cranes powered by electricity, diesel trucks, or modern project management systems, Roman builders repeatedly completed structures of extraordinary complexity. The villa highlights how much organizational knowledge has disappeared from the historical record. The sixth mystery concerns earthquake resistance. Southern Italy lies within an active tectonic region. Earthquakes affected Campania throughout Roman history. Modern structural engineering employs steel reinforcement, seismic dampers, and computer-designed foundations to reduce earthquake damage. Roman buildings lacked such technologies, yet many survived centuries of seismic activity. Researchers studying Roman architecture have identified features that may have improved resilience. Thick walls, flexible mortar joints, strategic use of arches, and distributed structural loads all appear to reduce stress concentrations. However, there remains no complete explanation for why some Roman structures survived repeated earthquakes while others collapsed. The villa may preserve valuable clues regarding ancient approaches to seismic engineering. Brahmagiri in Karnataka, southern India, appears at first to be little more than a hill surrounded by ancient stone circles. Yet beneath its soil lies evidence of engineering knowledge, iron production, and construction techniques that continue to raise questions more than 2,000 years later. The site gained international attention in 1947 when British archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler conducted systematic excavations and uncovered extensive megalithic burials, iron artifacts, pottery, and evidence of a sophisticated society that flourished during the Iron Age of southern India. What archaeologists found was not merely a cemetery, it was a technological landscape. Among Brahmagiri's most striking features are its megalithic stone circles. Hundreds of stones were carefully arranged to mark burial chambers hidden beneath the ground. At first glance, the structures appear simple, but closer examination reveals something more intriguing. Many circles display surprisingly consistent geometries. The stones were positioned to create nearly symmetrical layouts, despite being constructed long before modern surveying instruments existed. Some circles measure several meters across and contain underground chambers built from massive stone slabs. Creating such layouts required more than brute force. Builders needed methods for measuring distances, maintaining alignment, and preserving circular shapes across uneven terrain. Modern engineers accomplish similar tasks using measuring tapes, transit levels, and digital surveying equipment, yet the people of Brahmagiri possessed none of these tools. Even so, they achieved results that remained recognizable for over 2 millennia. The question remains unanswered. What surveying methods allowed these ancient builders to organize large numbers of stones with such consistency? The burial chambers beneath the circles were constructed using large granite slabs, some weighing hundreds of kilograms and occasionally exceeding a ton. Transporting stones of this size presents a significant engineering challenge even today. Experiments conducted on megalithic construction elsewhere in the world suggest that moving a single 1-ton block may require dozens of workers operating in perfect coordination, with friction, terrain, weather conditions, and stability all becoming critical factors. Brahmagiri sits within a landscape dominated by rocky hills and granite outcrops. Extracting suitable slabs, transporting them across uneven ground, and positioning them with precision would have required extensive planning. No written instructions survive, and no ancient diagrams explain the process. Like the builders of Stonehenge in Britain or the craters of the Moai statues on Easter Island, the people of Brahmagiri left behind the final product, but not the engineering manual. The burial chambers themselves represent another technological puzzle. Many consist of carefully fitted stone slabs arranged to create enclosed spaces capable of surviving thousands of years underground. These structures had to withstand soil pressure, seasonal moisture changes, and long-term geological stress. Modern archaeological studies indicate that some chambers remained remarkably intact despite centuries of environmental exposure. This durability suggests a practical understanding of structural stability. The builders knew which stones could support weight, how to position slabs to prevent collapse, and how to distribute loads without mortar or metal reinforcement. Yet none of this knowledge was recorded. The engineering principles survive only in stone. Perhaps the most important discoveries at Brahmagiri are the iron artifacts. Excavations revealed knives, spearheads, arrowheads, agricultural tools, and various iron objects dating to the early Iron Age. These finds demonstrate that the inhabitants possessed advanced metallurgical capabilities. Producing iron is far more difficult than producing copper. Copper melts at approximately 1085 degrees Celsius, while iron requires temperatures approaching 1200 degrees Celsius during bloomery production. Achieving such temperatures demands careful control of furnace design, airflow, fuel quality, and ore selection. Even slight mistakes can ruin an entire smelting operation. Experimental archaeologists attempting to recreate ancient iron production frequently encounter failures despite having access to modern scientific knowledge. Yet the metallurgists of Brahmagiri succeeded repeatedly, and their iron tools prove it. The mystery is not whether they understood metallurgy, the mystery is how they understood it so well. Of all Brahmagiri's mysteries, this may be the most fascinating. Ancient iron production was not a matter of simply heating rock until metal appeared. Every stage required precise, practical knowledge. The furnace needed the correct dimensions, the charcoal required specific burning properties, the ore needed suitable chemical composition, and the airflow had to remain within an effective range. Modern metallurgical analysis demonstrates that bloomery furnaces operate within surprisingly narrow performance windows. Too little oxygen prevents reduction of the ore, while too much oxygen oxidizes the metal and reduces quality. Ancient smiths had no thermometers, no pressure gauges, no chemical laboratories, and no written formulas, yet they consistently produced usable iron. This suggests the existence of an accumulated body of technical knowledge transmitted across generations. Some researchers compare this lost expertise to Roman concrete technology. The Romans produced marine concrete so durable that certain harbour structures have survived nearly 2,000 years of wave action. And modern scientists only recently began understanding the chemical processes responsible for its longevity. Brahmagiri presents a similar puzzle. The artifacts survive, but the knowledge does not. How did smiths determine the ideal charcoal-to-ore ratio? How did they recognize optimal furnace temperatures? How did they identify the best ore deposits without geological surveys? How did they train apprentices to reproduce successful results? Archaeologists can reconstruct parts of the process, but many operational details remain unknown. The formulas that once existed inside the minds of ancient metallurgists vanished long ago. What remains are the products of that knowledge. Technology does not emerge in isolation. The sophistication visible at Brahmagiri raises questions about how information moved across ancient India. Ironworking knowledge likely spread through networks of craftsmen, traders, and specialists operating over large distances. Yet no technical textbooks survive, and no instructional documents explain the transfer of metallurgical expertise. The situation resembles other ancient technological mysteries. The builders of the Egyptian pyramids moved millions of stone blocks, but left few detailed construction records. The creators of the Antikythera mechanism built an astronomical computer nearly 2,000 years ahead of its time. Yet no instruction manual has ever been discovered. The inhabitants of Brahmagiri mastered iron production, but the educational system that supported that achievement remains invisible. The scale of Brahmagiri's megalithic landscape implies organised labour, constructing stone circles, quarrying slabs, building chambers, producing tools and conducting burial ceremonies required coordination among large groups of people. This suggests leadership structures capable of planning complex projects. Who directed these activities? Were there specialist engineers, professional stoneworkers, master metallurgists, or religious authorities controlling labour resources? The archaeological evidence provides hints but no definitive answers. The physical remains demonstrate organisation, but the social mechanisms remain largely hidden. What do you think? Did the people of Brahmagiri possess technological knowledge far more advanced than historians currently recognise? Or are we simply underestimating the ingenuity of ancient engineering? Share your thoughts in the comments below. During excavations for the city's metro system, beginning in the early 21st century, archaeologists uncovered an extraordinary underground landscape of Roman and Byzantine streets, marketplaces, water systems, workshops, and monumental structures. What emerged was not simply a collection of ruins. It was an entire ancient city preserved beneath a living modern metropolis. The discoveries revealed engineering achievements that continue to raise difficult questions. How did ancient builders construct infrastructure capable of surviving earthquakes, invasions, fires, and nearly 2,000 years of urban development? More importantly, how did they achieve such remarkable technical precision without the instruments, materials, and scientific theories available today? One of the greatest mysteries involves the buried city itself. Archaeologists working beneath modern Thessaloniki discovered layers of construction stacked one above another, representing centuries of continuous occupation. Unlike sites abandoned and preserved in isolation, Thessaloniki remained inhabited throughout Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, and modern periods. Each generation built upon the remains of earlier structures. The result is an archaeological sequence resembling a giant vertical archive of urban engineering. In some areas, multiple building phases are compressed within only a few meters of depth. Maintaining structural stability under such conditions presents challenges even for modern engineers. Yet ancient builders repeatedly expanded, renovated, and reconstructed major districts while keeping the city functional. How they managed foundations across centuries of changing urban landscapes remains only partially understood. The second mystery centers on the city's remarkable resistance to earthquakes. Thessaloniki sits within one of the most seismically active regions of the Eastern Mediterranean. Historical records document numerous destructive earthquakes affecting northern Greece. Nevertheless, several Roman and Byzantine structures survived for centuries. The most famous example is the Rotunda, originally constructed during the reign of Emperor Galerius around AD 306. Its massive dome remains standing after more than 17 centuries. Modern engineers studying the structure have identified sophisticated methods of load distribution throughout the building. Thick masonry walls, carefully calculated geometry, and strategic use of brick layers appear to have helped absorb seismic forces. Yet there is no evidence that Roman architects possessed anything resembling modern structural engineering equations. The mystery is not that the Rotunda survives. The mystery is that builders without advanced mathematics created a structure capable of enduring repeated earthquakes while many much newer buildings failed. The third mystery concerns the construction of the Rotunda itself. The building measures approximately 24.5 meters in internal diameter and rises nearly 30 meters high. This places it among the largest surviving masonry domes from the ancient world. Comparisons are often made with the Pantheon in Rome, whose famous dome spans approximately 43 meters. While smaller than the Pantheon, the Rotunda presents a different puzzle. Unlike many monumental Roman buildings that benefited from centuries of architectural development, the Rotunda was constructed in a provincial city far from the empire's capital. Transporting the enormous quantities of stone, brick, mortar, and timber required for such a project would have represented a massive logistical challenge. Researchers estimate that thousands of tons of material were needed, yet no detailed records survive explaining how construction was organized, how lifting systems operated, or how engineers coordinated such a complex project. The building stands as evidence of capabilities that exceed what many historians once believed possible for provincial Roman construction. Another mystery involves Roman concrete and mortar technologies used throughout Thessaloniki. Modern laboratory analyses reveal that many ancient mortars possess extraordinary durability. Some contain volcanic materials imported from distant regions, while others exhibit mineral reactions that continue strengthening the material long after construction. Recent scientific studies of Roman concrete elsewhere in the Mediterranean have shown evidence of self-healing clay mechanisms capable of sealing microscopic cracks through chemical processes. Similar characteristics have been observed in some materials recovered from Thessaloniki. The challenge is understanding how ancient builders developed these formulas. Modern concrete production relies upon chemistry, materials science, and industrial quality control. Roman engineers possessed none of these disciplines in a modern sense, yet their structures routinely outlast concrete produced only a century ago. Whether this reflects lost empirical knowledge or deeper understanding remains debated. The fifth mystery concerns the city's underground water management systems. Excavations have uncovered extensive drainage networks beneath ancient streets. These systems collected rainwater, removed wastewater, and protected urban districts from flooding. Designing such infrastructure requires careful calculations of gradient. Even a small error can prevent water from flowing efficiently. Surveys conducted on surviving sections indicate surprisingly precise alignment over considerable distances. Some channels maintain consistent slopes despite crossing uneven terrain. The accuracy achieved rivals that of drainage systems designed using far more advanced tools. Archaeologists know that Roman surveyors employed instruments such as the chorobates and groma, but questions remain regarding the practical precision achievable with these devices. The engineering evidence suggests a level of surveying expertise that is still difficult to fully reconstruct. The sixth mystery emerged during metro excavations beneath the modern city centre. Archaeologists uncovered a remarkably preserved section of the ancient main avenue known as the Decumanus Maximus. The road included paved surfaces, drainage channels, commercial buildings, workshops, and public spaces. Some researchers described the discovery as a buried urban landscape, comparable in significance to sections of Pompeii. What makes the avenue remarkable is not merely its preservation but its organisation. The street functioned as part of an integrated urban system connecting transportation, commerce, water management, and public administration. Modern cities often require separate engineering teams to coordinate such infrastructure. Ancient planners achieved similar integration nearly 2 millennia ago. How administrative authorities coordinated projects on scale remains poorly understood because much of the documentary evidence has disappeared. Another technological mystery involves long-distance material transportation. Thessaloniki became one of the most important cities in the Roman and Byzantine worlds. Large public buildings required immense quantities of construction materials, marble, stone, timber, and specialized decorative elements arrived from various regions of the Mediterranean. Some marble varieties identified in surviving monuments originated hundreds of kilometers away. Moving such cargo required sophisticated supply chains involving quarries, ports, ships, roads, and labor forces. Historians can estimate trade routes, but reconstructing the exact logistical mechanisms remains difficult. The scale of construction suggests organizational capabilities comparable to those used for major imperial projects elsewhere in the Roman Empire. The eighth mystery concerns lost workshops and manufacturing districts hidden beneath the modern city. Excavations have revealed evidence of metalworking, ceramics production, glass manufacturing, and other industries. Chemical analyses of artifacts indicate consistent production standards. In some cases, products exhibit remarkable uniformity despite being created long before industrial manufacturing. Achieving such consistency requires knowledge of temperature control, raw material selection, and production techniques. Yet the furnaces, tools, and operational methods responsible for many of these products remain only partially preserved. Archaeologists often possess the finished artifacts but lack complete evidence for the technologies that produced them. Perhaps the greatest mystery of Thessaloniki is how much remains hidden. Modern excavations have uncovered only a small part of the ancient city, while large areas still lie beneath roads, buildings, and infrastructure. Surveys suggest that buried streets, water systems, workshops, and public buildings may still survive underground. Unlike many archaeological sites, Thessaloniki was never abandoned. It is a city that never disappeared. Templo Mayor was the most sacred structure of the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. Hidden beneath the center of present-day Mexico City, one of the largest modern cities on Earth, lie the remains of a temple complex that may preserve evidence of engineering, astronomy, and construction knowledge that researchers are still trying to fully understand. The modern discovery of Templo Mayor began in 1978 when electrical workers accidentally uncovered a massive stone disc depicting the Aztec goddess Coyolxauhqui. The find triggered one of the largest archaeological excavations in Mexican history. Archaeologists soon revealed that beneath the streets of Mexico City were the remains of the ceremonial heart of an empire that ruled millions of people before the Spanish conquest in 1521. One of the first mysteries concerns the location itself. Tenochtitlan was built on an island in Lake Texcoco, a shallow lake system in the Valley of Mexico. Modern engineers struggle with the same unstable ground today. Mexico City sinks by as much as 30 to 50 centimeters per year in some areas because of groundwater extraction. Yet the Aztecs managed to construct massive pyramids, plazas, palaces, and causeways on terrain that should have presented enormous structural challenges. Excavations have shown that Templo Mayor underwent at least 7 major construction phases between approximately 1325 and 1521. Each new version was built directly over the previous one, creating a giant architectural sequence similar to Russian nesting dolls. The largest phase reached an estimated height of around 45 meters. What puzzles researchers is how generations of builders maintained geometric consistency across centuries of expansion. Without surviving architectural plans, modern scholars can only speculate about the methods used to preserve alignment and symmetry over such a long period. The second mystery involves logistics. Archaeologists have recovered more than 200 ritual offerings containing thousands of objects from across Mesoamerica. These include jade from Guatemala, marine shells from both the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, coral, obsidian, jaguar remains, crocodile bones, eagle skeletons, and exotic fish species. Some materials traveled over 1,000 kilometers before reaching Tenochtitlan. Managing such a supply network would have required sophisticated organization. Unlike the Roman Empire, which relied heavily on wheeled transport and draft animals, the Aztecs possessed neither. Goods were carried by human porters known as tamimis or transported by canoe through extensive waterway networks. How this system consistently delivered rare materials from distant regions remains one of the most impressive logistical achievements of the pre-Columbian world. The third and perhaps most fascinating mystery involves astronomy. Many researchers believe Templo Mayor functioned as a giant astronomical instrument integrated into the religious and political life of the Aztec Empire. The temple's twin shrines were dedicated to Tlaloc, the rain god, and Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god. Their positioning appears to have been carefully planned, rather than chosen at random. Studies conducted during the 20th and 21st centuries identified potential alignments between the temple and significant solar events. Researchers observed that on certain dates associated with the agricultural calendar, the rising sun appeared between key architectural features of the complex. These observations would have helped priests determine the timing of planting seasons, religious ceremonies, and state rituals. The precision of these alignments raises difficult questions. The Aztecs had no telescopes, no optical instruments, and no written mathematical treatises comparable to those of ancient Greece. Yet they developed a calendar system accurate enough to coordinate ceremonies across a vast empire. Some archaeoastronomers have suggested that centuries of systematic sky observation allowed Aztec priests to track solar movement with remarkable accuracy. The sun's position on the horizon changes throughout the year. By recording these changes over generations, it would have been possible to establish highly reliable observational markers. However, there is still debate regarding how precise these alignments truly were. Some researchers argue that the observed astronomical connections are intentional and represent advanced observational science. Others caution that certain alignments may be partly coincidental. The controversy remains unresolved. The mystery becomes even deeper when Templo Mare is compared with other ancient astronomical centres. Stonehenge in England tracks solstitial sunrise positions. The pyramids of Giza display extraordinary cardinal orientation. The Maya city of Chichen Itza incorporates solar shadow effects during equinoxes. Templo Mare appears to belong within this global tradition of monumental architecture connected to celestial observation. Yet, unlike Stonehenge or Giza, Templo Mare existed within a densely populated urban environment. Its astronomical functions had to coexist with political administration, military ceremonies, religious festivals, and daily life. This combination of practical urban planning and celestial alignment makes the site especially intriguing. Another mystery concerns the temple's hydraulic engineering. Tenochtitlan depended on an elaborate network of canals, dikes, aqueducts, and artificial agricultural islands known as chinampas. Historical accounts describe a city crossed by waterways, resembling Venice. The challenge was not merely bringing water into the city, but controlling it. Lake Texcoco contained brackish water, while much of the city's population required fresh water. The famous dike attributed to the ruler Nezahualcóyotl reportedly stretched for approximately 16 kilometers and helped separate saline and freshwater zones. Maintaining such infrastructure required knowledge of hydrology that archaeologists are still attempting to reconstruct. Templo Mare itself reveals evidence of drainage systems designed to protect ceremonial areas from flooding. Given the unstable lake environment, even minor engineering errors could have produced catastrophic structural damage. Yet the temple survived repeated enlargements for nearly 2 centuries. The fifth mystery involves obsidian technology. Obsidian is volcanic glass formed by rapidly cooled lava. Microscopic analysis has demonstrated that obsidian blades can possess cutting edges significantly sharper than modern surgical steel. Numerous obsidian knives recovered from Templo Mare exhibit extraordinary craftsmanship. Producing these tools required precise control over fracture mechanics. Unlike metal, obsidian cannot be forged or reshaped after breaking. A single mistake could ruin an entire blade. The consistency observed among many excavated specimens suggests the existence of highly specialized craftsmen with extensive technical knowledge. Another unanswered question concerns the enormous stone monuments associated with the temple. The famous Koyalzauki stone measures more than 3 meters in diameter and weighs several tons. Transporting such objects through an island city without wheeled vehicles remains difficult to explain in detail. Archaeologists generally believe that teams of laborers, ropes, wooden rollers, and ramps were used. However, no direct descriptions of the exact procedures survive. As a result, many aspects of Aztec heavy construction remain theoretical. The final mystery is not a single technology, but an entire system of knowledge that vanished after the Spanish conquest. When Hernán Cortés entered Tenochtitlan, in 1519, the city may have contained between 200,000 and 300,000 inhabitants, making it comparable to or larger than many European capitals of the period. Within just a few years, war, disease, and colonial reconstruction transformed the city. Temples were demolished, records were destroyed, and generations of specialized knowledge disappeared. The physical remains survived underground, but much of the intellectual framework that created them was lost forever. The ancient ruins of Paphos, located on the southwest coast of Cyprus, preserve one of the greatest archaeological mysteries of the Roman world. How did ancient engineers and artists create masterpieces of such precision that they still challenge modern explanations nearly 2,000 years later? Systematic excavations began after a farmer accidentally uncovered part of a mosaic floor in 1962 near modern Paphos, leading archaeologists to reveal an entire buried Roman city filled with villas, tombs, theatres, and engineering works. The greatest mystery of Paphos lies beneath visitors' feet. Inside the House of Dionysus, House of Theseus, and House of Ion are some of the finest Roman mosaics ever discovered. Created between the 2nd and 4th centuries AD, these floors cover thousands of square meters and contain millions of tiny stone pieces known as tesserae. At first glance, they appear beautiful. Under scientific examination, they become puzzling. Many tesserae measure only a few millimeters across, yet the artist created smooth curves, realistic human anatomy, detailed facial expressions, and sophisticated shading effects that resemble painted artwork rather than stone construction. In some scenes, figures appear three-dimensional despite being composed entirely of coloured stones. The House of Dionysus alone contains approximately 2,000 square meters of mosaics. To maintain consistent proportions across such vast surfaces would require an extraordinary level of planning. Modern mosaic artists often rely on scaled drawings, projection methods, or digital templates. Roman craftsmen had none of these tools. Archaeologists believe master designers may have used geometric grids, string systems, and preliminary sketches. However, no complete design manuals have ever been found. The exact workflow remains unknown. The mystery becomes even greater when comparing Paphos with other famous Roman mosaic centres. Mosaics from sites in North Africa, such as those at El Gem Amphitheatre and nearby Roman villas, display exceptional quality, but many experts consider the finest works of Paphos equal or superior in complexity. Some scenes contain hundreds of individual figures arranged with remarkable mathematical balance. What remains unexplained is consistency. Different villas built decades apart exhibit nearly identical standards of craftsmanship. This suggests the existence of highly organized training systems or workshops whose methods disappeared without leaving written records. Modern researchers can identify pigments, stone sources, and construction layers using spectroscopy and microscopic analysis. Yet they still cannot fully reconstruct how ancient craftsmen coordinated thousands of design decisions with such precision over enormous surfaces. The mosaics survived earthquakes, invasions, weathering, and nearly 2 millennia of burial. Ironically, we understand the stones themselves better than the knowledge that assembled them. Cyprus sits near active tectonic zones where earthquakes have repeatedly devastated cities throughout history. Historical records describe major earthquakes striking the island in the 4th century AD, particularly around AD 332 and AD 365. Many ancient settlements were heavily damaged or destroyed. Yet, portions of Paphos endured. Excavations reveal that builders often combined different construction materials within the same structure. Rather than relying entirely on rigid stone blocks, they incorporated layers capable of distributing stress and absorbing vibration. Some foundations appear deliberately designed to reduce structural failure. Similar concepts can be seen in later earthquake-resistant architecture developed centuries afterward. The mystery is not that Roman engineers understood earthquakes. The mystery is how much they understood. Without seismographs, geological surveys, or modern engineering calculations, builders repeatedly created structures capable of surviving in a dangerous seismic environment. Their practical knowledge may have been based on centuries of observation, but the exact principles they applied remain uncertain. Ancient cities live or die by water. Unlike cities positioned along major rivers such as Alexandria on the Nile or Antioch on the Orontes, Paphos lacked access to a massive permanent river system. Nevertheless, it supported a substantial urban population for centuries. Archaeologists have uncovered reservoirs, cisterns, channels, wells, and distribution systems spread throughout the city. The engineering challenge was enormous. Water had to travel across varying terrain while maintaining carefully controlled gradients. Even slight errors could cause stagnation, overflow, or complete system failure. Surveys show that many Roman aqueduct systems throughout the empire operated with gradients measured in only a few centimeters per 100 meters. Comparable levels of precision appear within parts of the infrastructure serving Paphos. How ancient surveyors achieved such accuracy remains debated. Roman instruments such as the chorobates and groma are known from historical texts, but their practical limits are still discussed by engineers today. The water system demonstrates that Paphos was not merely a collection of buildings. It functioned as a carefully managed machine. Few locations in Cyprus are more enigmatic than the tombs of the kings. Despite the name, most of the individuals buried there were likely elite officials and aristocrats, rather than actual kings. Carved directly into solid limestone between the 3rd century BC and 1st century AD, these tombs resemble underground palaces. Many contain courtyards, columns, chambers, and symmetrical layouts. Creating such structures required removing thousands of tons of rock. Unlike building upward, excavation offers little room for error. A mistake in alignment can ruin an entire project. Yet many tomb complexes display remarkable geometric precision. Columns align accurately with surrounding walls, while courtyards maintain carefully planned proportions. Researchers still debate how ancient builders established reference points underground, while preserving symmetry across large excavated spaces. The challenge resembles that faced by the creators of Petra in Jordan and the rock-cut monuments of Egypt, yet many technical details remain unknown. Excavations have revealed evidence of a highly organized city. Roads, villas, public buildings, markets, baths, and administrative structures were integrated into a coherent urban framework. The House of Theseus alone covers roughly 9,000 square meters, making it one of the largest Roman residences discovered in the Eastern Mediterranean. Managing a city of this scale required surveying, logistics, taxation, labor coordination, material transport, and long-term planning. The Roman Empire certainly possessed administrative expertise. What remains mysterious is how local engineers translated imperial concepts into functioning urban systems adapted specifically to Cyprus. No complete planning documents survive. The city itself is the only remaining blueprint. Perhaps the greatest mystery of Paphos is not what survives, but what vanished. Modern archaeology employs satellite imaging, laser scanning, ground-penetrating radar, digital modeling, chemical analysis, and artificial intelligence. These technologies allow researchers to study ancient structures in unprecedented detail. Yet despite all these tools, many practical aspects of construction remain hidden. How were mosaic masters trained? How were enormous projects coordinated? How did surveyors achieve such remarkable precision? How were engineering techniques transmitted across generations? The answers disappeared long ago. If archaeologists could recover one lost secret from Paphos, would you choose the technique behind its perfect mosaics, or the engineering knowledge that kept the city functioning for centuries? The lost city of Tiranaka is hidden deep in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in northern Colombia, a mountain range that rises from the Caribbean coast to more than 5,700 meters in less than 50 kilometers. Long before Europeans arrived in South America, The Tirona civilization built a network of settlements across these mountains. At the center was Tironaka, better known today as Ciudad Perdida, or the Lost City. What makes the site remarkable is not only its age or isolation. The greatest mystery is how a society without iron tools, wheeled transportation, or large draft animals managed to build a city that could withstand one of the harshest tropical environments on Earth for more than 1,000 years. The modern discovery of the city occurred in the 1970s when local treasure hunters, known as huasaqueros, followed ancient stone stairways into jungle-covered mountains. Their discoveries attracted the attention of Colombian archaeologists, who soon realized that the site represented one of the largest pre-Columbian urban centers ever found in South America. Archaeological investigations revealed more than 250 stone terraces connected by roads, staircases, retaining walls, and drainage systems spread across steep mountain slopes. Radiocarbon dating indicates that the city was established around AD 800, making it several centuries older than Machu Picchu in Peru. The first great mystery concerns the engineering of the mountains themselves. Modern engineers understand how difficult it is to construct stable settlements on steep slopes. Landslides, erosion, and heavy rainfall constantly threaten infrastructure. Yet the Tirona transformed mountainsides into a complex urban landscape through the construction of hundreds of artificial terraces. Some terraces required moving thousands of cubic meters of earth and stone. Unlike the Inca, who often built on relatively stable highland plateaus, the Tirona worked within dense tropical mountains where annual rainfall frequently exceeds 4,000 millimeters. The question is simple: how did they know where to build? Modern geotechnical engineers use soil analysis, slope stability calculations, and hydrological models before beginning construction. The Tirona possessed none of these technologies. Nevertheless, many terraces remain remarkably stable after more than 1,200 years. Archaeologists have found evidence that builders carefully selected locations where natural bedrock provided support while retaining walls distributed pressure across the slope. The precision suggests a sophisticated understanding of mountain geology acquired entirely through observation and experience. Yet the methods used to identify safe construction zones remain unknown. The second mystery involves the city's extraordinary drainage system. Tropical rainfall destroys ancient settlements throughout the world. In regions such as Southeast Asia, abandoned cities often disappear beneath vegetation within centuries. Tironaka should have suffered the same fate. Instead, much of its infrastructure survived. Excavations revealed an extensive network of stone-lined channels running beneath terraces, plazas, and pathways. These channels directed rainwater away from critical structures and prevented erosion. Engineers studying the system have noted that many channels still function today. Water continues to flow through routes established more than a millennium ago. The scale of this achievement becomes apparent when compared to other ancient civilizations. The Romans constructed famous aqueducts across Europe. The Maya developed sophisticated reservoirs in Central America. The Inca built mountain drainage systems at Machu Picchu. Yet Tironaka accomplished comparable hydrological control in one of the wettest environments inhabited by any major pre-Columbian civilization. What remains unexplained is how the system was designed. There are no surviving plans, measurements, or written instructions. The Tirona left no deciphered writing system. Everything depended upon practical knowledge transmitted across generations. Modern archaeology can map the channels, but it cannot fully reconstruct the intellectual framework behind their design. The third mystery concerns transportation. Every stone used in the city had to be moved through rugged terrain covered by dense forest. The Tirona lacked horses, oxen, and wheeled vehicles. South America possessed no equivalent of the draft animals used in ancient Europe or Asia. Yet thousands of tons of stone were transported and positioned with remarkable accuracy. Some terraces contain retaining walls several meters high. Building such structures required coordinated labor, careful planning, and methods for moving heavy materials uphill. Experimental archaeology suggests that teams using ropes, wooden sleds, and human labor could have accomplished the task. However, calculations indicate that moving even a single large stone block up steep mountain slopes would require significant manpower. So this raises a larger question. If constructing one terrace required such effort, how did the Tairona build hundreds? The city appears to represent generations of continuous engineering investment. Archaeologists estimate that the broader Tairona network may have supported tens of thousands of people. Such projects imply organizational capabilities far beyond what earlier researchers imagined for tropical chiefdoms. The fourth mystery is the city's hidden road network. Surveys have revealed stone-paved pathways connecting settlements throughout the Sierra Nevada. Some routes cross steep ridges, descend into river valleys, and climb mountains again. Together they formed a transportation system linking communities separated by difficult terrain. The engineering challenge is comparable to aspects of the Inca road system, which eventually stretched more than 40 kilometers across western South America. While the Tairona network was smaller, it faced unique environmental obstacles. Tropical vegetation grows rapidly. Heavy rainfall erodes exposed surfaces. Rivers frequently change course. Yet many ancient pathways remained usable centuries after abandonment. Researchers continue to debate how these routes were maintained. Did specialized workers inspect and repair roads? Was labor organized through local communities? Or did political authorities coordinate construction across multiple settlements? The archaeological evidence provides clues, but no definitive answers. The fifth mystery involves urban planning. At first glance, Tiwanaku appears chaotic because it follows the contours of the mountains. However, detailed surveys reveal underlying patterns. Residential areas, ceremonial spaces, administrative centers, and agricultural zones appear carefully organized. Certain terraces occupy strategic positions overlooking transportation corridors. Others are linked to plazas that may have served social or political functions. The city was not randomly assembled, it was planned. This presents a paradox. Many ancient civilizations relied on writing, bureaucracy, and centralized records to coordinate large construction projects. The Tairona appear to have achieved comparable levels of organization without surviving evidence of such systems. The knowledge required to manage labor, resources, and engineering projects remains largely invisible. The sixth mystery concerns agriculture. Supporting a large mountain population required intensive food production. Archaeologists have identified extensive agricultural terraces throughout the Sierra Nevada region. These systems reduced erosion, conserved water, and expanded cultivable land. What remains unclear is how agricultural productivity was maintained over centuries. Tropical soils often lose nutrients rapidly. Modern farmers frequently depend on fertilizers and scientific soil management. The Tairona achieved long-term sustainability using methods that remain poorly understood. Studies of soil chemistry suggest that indigenous farmers may have employed sophisticated land management strategies involving crop diversity, organic enrichment, and landscape engineering. However, direct evidence is limited. Much of the agricultural system vanished long before modern researchers arrived. The seventh mystery is how the Tairona coordinated hundreds of mountain settlements. Despite the difficult terrain, artifacts from different sites show strikingly similar craftsmanship and design, suggesting strong communication networks that spread technical knowledge. Without written records, archaeologists can only speculate. Some believe ritual specialists carried knowledge between communities, while others point to elite family networks built through marriage and trade. Whatever the method, it helped preserve engineering traditions for centuries. The final mystery is the disappearance of the city itself. Spanish chroniclers recorded encounters with Tairona communities during the 16th century. European diseases, warfare, forced resettlement, and colonial disruption devastated indigenous populations throughout the region. By the time the city was abandoned, much of the knowledge responsible for its construction had already begun to disappear. The tragedy is that the physical structures survived, while the engineering knowledge behind them did not. What do you think was the true secret behind Taranaka's survival for more than 1,000 years? Superior environmental engineering, a lost system of knowledge, or something archaeologists have not yet discovered? Myrtos Pyrgos was a Bronze Age Minoan industrial centre located on the south coast of Crete, Greece. Nearly 4,000 years ago, this settlement produced, stored, and distributed goods on a scale that still surprises archaeologists today. The site was first excavated extensively by British archaeologist Gerald Cadogan beginning in the 1960s. Beneath layers of collapsed stone buildings, researchers uncovered workshops, storage facilities, industrial installations, and evidence of large-scale agricultural processing. What emerged was not a simple village, but something far more sophisticated, a production centre operating centuries before most of Europe developed comparable economic complexity. The greatest mystery of Myrtos Pyrgos is not its architecture or its age. It is the level of technological organisation achieved by people living during the Bronze Age. How did a society without iron tools, modern machinery, or written records that can be fully understood create what appears to have been an industrial economy? Most Bronze Age settlements in Europe were relatively small agricultural communities focused on local survival, yet Myrtos Pyrgos appears fundamentally different. Excavations revealed evidence for specialized production areas, storage facilities, administrative spaces, and manufacturing activities concentrated within a single settlement. Archaeologists identified workshops associated with food processing, textile production, and agricultural storage. This level of specialization resembles economic systems normally associated with much larger urban centers. Similar patterns are seen at major Minoan sites such as Knossos and Phaistos, yet Pyrgos was not a palace and lacked the monumental architecture usually associated with centralized authority. The question remains unanswered. Who coordinated all of this activity? Producing surplus goods requires planning, labour organisation, transportation networks, and resource management. Yet the mechanisms behind these operations remain largely invisible because the administrative records of Minoan Crete remain undeciphered. The result is an archaeological paradox. We can see the products of a highly organised system, but we cannot fully understand the system itself. The most fascinating mystery at Myrtos Pyrgos involves olive oil production. Today, olive oil is often viewed as a simple agricultural product. In reality, producing high-quality oil at industrial scale requires an extraordinary understanding of timing, engineering, chemistry, and logistics. Archaeological evidence suggests that Pyrgos was deeply involved in olive processing during the Bronze Age. Storage facilities, large containers, processing installations, and agricultural remains all point towards significant production activity. This raises a remarkable question. How were Bronze Age people producing olive oil at a scale capable of supporting regional trade nearly 4,000 years ago? Modern olive oil production depends on carefully controlled procedures. Olives must be harvested at the correct stage of ripeness. Delays can reduce quality. Crushing must occur quickly. Separation of oil from water requires technical knowledge, and storage conditions must prevent oxidation and spoilage. Yet, evidence suggests that Minoan producers were successfully managing these challenges long before the scientific principles involved were understood. Some of the storage jars discovered at Minoan sites across Crete, known as pithoi, could hold hundreds or even thousands of litres. Certain examples exceed 1.5 metres in height. Their presence indicates storage volumes far beyond the needs of individual households. The scale becomes even more impressive when compared with other contemporary societies. Around 2000 BC, much of Europe remained dominated by relatively small farming communities. Meanwhile, communities in Crete were already participating in maritime trade networks extending hundreds of kilometers across the eastern Mediterranean. Researchers estimate that olive trees require years before reaching productive maturity. Establishing large olive plantations therefore demanded long-term planning extending across generations. Such investments suggest sophisticated economic thinking rarely associated with prehistoric societies. Another puzzle concerns efficiency. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that traditional stone presses can achieve surprisingly high extraction rates when operated by experienced workers. Some reconstructed systems recover substantial percentages of available oil despite their apparent simplicity. This raises the possibility that Minoan producers possessed practical engineering knowledge accumulated through centuries of experimentation. But exactly how efficient were their systems? Nobody knows. No complete pressing installation has survived in operational condition, and archaeologists must reconstruct the process from fragments, foundations, containers, and indirect evidence. The technology that powered one of the Mediterranean's earliest major export industries remains partly hidden. One of the most striking discoveries at Pyrgos is the scale of storage capacity. Large pithoi were found throughout the settlement. These enormous ceramic vessels required significant resources to manufacture. Producing a single jar involved collecting clay, preparing materials, shaping massive forms, controlling firing temperatures, and transport finished vessels without breaking them. Such containers were not created casually. Their presence suggests organized collection and redistribution of agricultural products. But what exactly was being stored? Olive oil is one possibility, wine is another. Grain, dried foods, and other trade commodities may also have been present. The mystery is not merely what the jars contained, but how inventory was managed. Without modern accounting systems, how did administrators track quantities moving through the settlement? The answer may once have existed in documents written in Linear A, the undeciphered script of the Minoans. Unfortunately, the script remains one of archaeology's greatest unsolved puzzles. Crete sits within one of the most active seismic regions in the Mediterranean. Over thousands of years, powerful earthquakes have repeatedly struck the island. Despite this danger, the builders of Pyrgos constructed substantial stone buildings, multiple room complexes, staircases, and structures that survived long enough to leave significant archaeological remains. This raises another engineering mystery. How much did Minoan builders understand about earthquake-resistant construction? Researchers studying Minoan architecture have noted features that may have helped structures absorb seismic stress. Flexible materials, timber reinforcements, carefully distributed weight, and strategic wall layouts appear repeatedly across Minoan sites. Whether these were intentional anti-earthquake technologies or fortunate architectural traditions remains debated. Either way, the results are remarkable. Many structures endured in a region where earthquakes regularly destroy modern buildings. The final mystery may be the most important. Myrtos Pyrgos clearly participated in a complex economy. Production occurred, goods were stored, trade took place, and labor was organized. Yet the administrative systems behind these activities remains largely invisible. Linear A inscriptions discovered across Crete demonstrate that the Minoans possessed a writing system. However, unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, Linear A has never been fully deciphered. As a result, we may be looking directly at records of Bronze Age production while being unable to read them. Bylany, in central Bohemia near Kutná Hora in the Czech Republic, preserves evidence of a farming society that achieved levels of organization and productivity thousands of years before metal tools, writing, or states existed. The site was identified through archaeological investigations beginning in 1953 under Czech archaeologist Bohumil Sudsky. Excavations eventually revealed one of the largest known settlements of the linear pottery culture, or LBK, dating to approximately 5500 to 4900 BC. What archaeologists discovered was not simply a prehistoric village. It was a landscape filled with longhouses, storage pits, agricultural evidence, and signs of a surprisingly advanced farming economy. More than 70 years after its discovery, Bylany continues to raise questions about how some of Europe's earliest farmers achieved results that appear difficult to explain with the technology they possessed. The most visible feature of Bylany is its collection of Neolithic longhouses. Archaeologists have identified traces of more than 100 structures, many measuring between 20 and 40 meters in length, with some approaching 45 meters. Building projects of this scale would have required thousands of wooden posts, massive roof frameworks, and careful engineering. Yet the inhabitants possessed no iron axes, steel saws, or advanced lifting equipment. Their primary tools were polished stone axes, flint blades, and wooden implements. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that felling a mature oak tree using a polished stone axe can require several hours of continuous work. A single longhouse may have consumed hundreds of large timbers, making the labor investment enormous. The mystery is not merely how one house was built, but how dozens were constructed, maintained, replaced, and expanded over generations. Similar longhouses appear throughout LBK settlements across Central Europe, but Bylany provides one of the clearest examples of a community capable of organizing large-scale construction without written planning systems. Another puzzle emerges from the arrangement of the settlement itself. The longhouses were not scattered randomly across the landscape. Many shared similar orientations and were grouped in recognizable patterns, suggesting that the inhabitants followed rules regarding space, construction, and community organization. No maps have survived, no writing existed, and no measuring instruments have been recovered. Yet the settlement demonstrates a degree of planning unexpected for such an early farming society. Some researchers have proposed that standardized measurements based on ropes, body units, or inherited construction traditions may have existed. However, direct evidence remains absent. The result is a strange contradiction, a community that appears highly organized, but leaves no written explanation of how that organization functioned. When the first LBK farmers arrived in Central Europe, much of the region was covered by dense temperate forest. Creating the agricultural landscape visible at Bylany required clearing enormous areas of woodland. Trees had to be cut, roots removed, fields prepared, and grazing land established for livestock. Pollen studies indicate significant environmental transformation. During the Neolithic period, entire sections of natural forest disappeared and were replaced by human-managed landscapes. What remains difficult to understand is the speed at which this transformation occurred. Modern forestry machinery can clear land rapidly, but Neolithic farmers possessed only stone tools. Compared with other prehistoric societies, the scale of environmental modification at Bylany suggests a level of labor organization that continues to surprise researchers. This may be the greatest mystery of all. Agriculture arrived in Central Europe around 5500 BC with the expansion of LBK communities. The crops cultivated at Bylany included einkorn wheat, emmer wheat, barley, peas, and lentils, while livestock included cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats. At first glance, the system appears simple, yet the archaeological evidence suggests something far more sophisticated. The settlement remained occupied for centuries, new houses replaced older ones, populations persisted, and food supplies remained sufficiently stable to support construction projects, animal husbandry, and long-distance exchange networks. This creates a major scientific problem. Ancient agriculture is typically vulnerable to soil exhaustion because continuous cultivation removes nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium from the ground. In many traditional farming systems, yields decline after repeated harvests unless fertility is restored. The question therefore becomes obvious. How did Neolithic farmers maintain productive fields generation after generation without modern fertilizers? Archaeologists have proposed several explanations. One possibility involves extensive manuring. Chemical analyses from other LBK sites have revealed isotopic signatures suggesting that animal manure may have been systematically applied to crops. If similar practices occurred at Bylany, these farmers may have understood soil fertility management far earlier than once believed. Another possibility is rotational farming. Rather than cultivating the same plots continuously, farmers may have shifted cultivation areas while allowing exhausted land to recover naturally. A third hypothesis involves mixed farming systems in which livestock and agriculture operated together in a highly integrated cycle. Animals provided manure, crop residues fed animals, and nutrients circulated throughout the settlement economy. What makes the mystery especially fascinating is comparison with later historical societies. Many medieval European communities struggled with declining yields and periodic famines, despite possessing iron tools, ploughs, and more advanced technologies. Yet Bylany's inhabitants appear to have sustained agricultural production for centuries, using little more than stone, tools, and accumulated ecological knowledge. Researchers studying LBK agriculture have estimated that wheat yields may have ranged from approximately 500 to 1,500 kilograms per hectare, depending on environmental conditions. Although modest by modern standards, such productivity would have been sufficient to support substantial populations if managed effectively. The challenge is that we still do not know exactly how they achieved this consistency. No written manuals exist, no farming records survive, and the knowledge disappeared thousands of years ago. All that remains are traces in the soil. Artifacts discovered at Bylany reveal connections extending far beyond the settlement itself. Geochemical analyses show that some stone materials originated hundreds of kilometers away, and certain flints likely came from southern Poland and other distant regions of Central Europe. This indicates the existence of exchange networks spanning remarkable distances. The mystery is logistical. There were no paved roads, no wagons on an industrial scale, and no states managing transportation. Yet valuable materials consistently moved across large territories. The situation resembles an early version of the exchange systems that would later characterize Bronze Age Europe, except that Bylany predates those networks by thousands of years. Excavations have uncovered thousands of pits scattered throughout the settlement. Some were originally dug to obtain clay for construction, while others became storage facilities, waste deposits, or locations for ritual activities. Several contain unusual combinations of artifacts, animal bones, and domestic refuse. Some appear carefully filled, while others seem deliberately abandoned. Despite decades of excavation, archaeologists still debate their exact functions. Were they storage facilities, ritual spaces, or markers of ownership? The evidence supports multiple interpretations, but no single explanation accounts for all examples. Roman mass grave is a term used for a collection of mass burial sites discovered across the former Roman world, from York in Britain to Calcrease in Germany. Thousands of skeletons have been uncovered from these graves, revealing not only how people died, but also how the Roman Empire managed warfare, medicine, logistics, and engineering on a remarkable scale. The greatest mystery is not the deaths themselves, but the level of technological and organizational sophistication hidden beneath the bones. Many Roman mass graves were discovered by accident. Construction projects, road expansions, and archaeological excavations revealed large groups of human remains buried together. One of the most significant discoveries was made at Driffield Terrace in York, England, where archaeologists uncovered more than 80 decapitated male skeletons between 2004 and 2005. Other major findings came from the Calcrease battlefield in Germany, which is widely linked to the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in AD 9, where thousands of Roman soldiers were defeated by Germanic tribes. These sites turned scattered historical records into tangible archaeological evidence. The first mystery involves the remarkable efficiency with which the Romans handled mass casualties. Ancient historians described battles involving tens of thousands of soldiers. The Battle of Cannae in 216 BC reportedly resulted in more than 50 Silzone Roman deaths in a single day. Even if ancient estimates were exaggerated, the scale of casualties was enormous. Yet archaeological evidence often shows bodies arranged in organized layers rather than dumped randomly. This suggests that Roman forces possessed highly structured procedures for collecting, transporting, identifying, and burying the dead. Without trucks, cranes, or modern machinery, moving thousands of bodies after a battle would have required extraordinary coordination. Historians understand parts of the Roman military machine, but the exact logistics behind large-scale battlefield recovery operations remain unclear. The second, and perhaps most fascinating mystery concerns battlefield surgery. Roman mass graves preserve direct evidence of medical procedures that seem surprisingly advanced for an ancient civilization. Numerous skeletons recovered from military cemeteries display signs of healed amputations, repaired fractures, and surgical interventions. Some skulls contain evidence of trepanation, a procedure involving the deliberate drilling or cutting of the skull. Other remains show clean amputations of arms or legs where the bone surface indicates that the patient survived long enough for healing to occur. In several cases, bones reveal smooth regrowth around surgical cuts, demonstrating that the operation was successful. This presents a major puzzle. The Roman Empire had no knowledge of bacteria, no antibiotics, and no modern anesthesia. Yet some patients survived procedures that would remain highly dangerous even centuries later. Military doctors known as medici served Roman legions, and archaeological discoveries have revealed sophisticated surgical instruments including scalpels, forceps, probes, hooks, catheters, and specialized bone-cutting tools. Some Roman scalpels were manufactured from steel and remain recognizable to modern surgeons. The mystery is not whether Roman surgery existed. The mystery is how effective it was. Experimental studies suggest that severe infections should have killed many patients following major surgery. Yet skeletal evidence repeatedly demonstrates survival after operations. Roman medical texts describe the use of wine, vinegar, honey, and herbal compounds during treatment. Modern science has confirmed that honey possesses antibacterial properties and that wine can act as a mild antiseptic. However, researchers still debate whether these methods alone can explain the survival rates implied by the archaeological evidence. Comparisons with later history make the puzzle even more striking. During the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century, battlefield infections remained one of the leading causes of death, despite advances in medical knowledge. During the American Civil War, infection killed countless wounded soldiers. In some circumstances, Roman military medicine appears surprisingly competitive with systems developed nearly 2,000 years later. Another unanswered question concerns training. The Roman army maintained approximately 25 to 30 legions during the imperial period, representing more than 150,000 legionaries, not including auxiliaries. Supporting such forces required hundreds of medical personnel distributed across vast distances. How standardized was their medical education? How were surgical techniques transmitted throughout the empire? Archaeologists continue to search for answers. The third mystery involves weapon technology revealed through skeletal trauma. Roman mass graves function almost like forensic laboratories frozen in time. Researchers can analyze wounds and reconstruct how soldiers died. Many skulls contain deep, narrow cuts consistent with blows from Roman swords. Others show puncture wounds produced by spears or pilum javelins. At Calcarees, investigators documented injuries that suggest highly disciplined combat techniques. Patterns of trauma often repeat across numerous skeletons, indicating standardized military training and standardized weapons. The Roman gladius was typically around 60 centimeters long and optimized for thrusting attacks. Ancient writers described Roman soldiers targeting vulnerable areas with remarkable precision. Skeletal evidence supports these accounts. The consistency of wounds raises questions about how Roman manufacturers maintained weapon quality across an empire stretching more than 5 million square kilometers at its peak. The fourth mystery concerns supply networks. Every mass grave represents the remains of soldiers who belong to a much larger military system. A single legion usually consisted of approximately 5,000 to 6,000 men. Feeding such a force required enormous quantities of grain, meat, water, equipment, and medical supplies. Historical estimates suggest that a legion could consume several tons of food every day. Yet Roman armies operated across deserts, mountains, forests, and frontier regions. Isotopic analysis of skeletal remains provides additional clues. Chemical signatures preserved within teeth and bones reveal where individuals grew up and what they ate. Studies have shown that soldiers buried together sometimes originated from entirely different regions of the empire. Men from North Africa, the Balkans, Gaul, Britain, and the Near East could serve in the same military structure. Managing such diversity required sophisticated administration. Payroll records, supply inventories, transport schedules, recruitment systems, and medical support networks had to function across thousands of kilometers. The physical remains demonstrate that the system worked. The exact mechanisms behind that success remain partly hidden. The fifth mystery involves identification and memory. Ancient battlefields were chaotic environments, yet Roman forces often returned years later to recover remains. The Roman historian Tacitus described how Germanicus revisited the site of the Teutoburg disaster around 6 years after the battle and ordered the burial of Roman bones still scattered across the landscape. The remarkable question is how those locations were remembered. Without satellite imagery, aerial surveys, or modern mapping systems, Roman commanders maintained knowledge of battlefield positions over long periods. Archaeological evidence suggests that many burial locations were carefully marked and organized. Wooden markers have long since vanished, but burial patterns indicate deliberate planning. This hints at a level of military record-keeping that exceeds what survives in written sources. The greatest mystery may be Rome's ability to combine medicine, engineering, logistics, administration, and military science into one efficient system. These mass graves reveal an empire that could recruit, equip, transport, and care for soldiers across vast distances for centuries. The skeletons are silent evidence of this achievement, yet much of the knowledge behind this system disappeared after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, leaving only the remains while the full organizational structure was lost. Lubicza Królewska is an archaeological site in southeastern Poland, near the modern border with Ukraine. Beneath its quiet farmland lies evidence of communities that developed surprisingly advanced technologies thousands of years before writing reached this part of Europe. The site came to wider archaeological attention through systematic excavations and surveys that revealed settlements associated with Neolithic and early Bronze Age cultures, including funnel beaker and corded ware communities. What researchers uncovered was not a lost city or monumental temple. Instead, they found something that may be even more mysterious: evidence of technological knowledge that should have been difficult for small farming societies to develop, preserve, and transmit over centuries. The first mystery involves the construction of large timber buildings. Archaeologists identified post holes indicating the existence of longhouses stretching more than 30 meters in length. Such structures required hundreds of trees and thousands of hours of labor. Experimental archaeology projects conducted in Central Europe have shown that felling a single mature oak using polished stone axes can require hours of continuous work. Building an entire settlement would therefore have demanded a level of organization that seems surprisingly sophisticated for communities without writing, centralized governments, or metal tools. Researchers still debate how these projects were coordinated. Did village leaders organize labor through social authority? Were construction techniques shared between distant communities? Or did specialized builders travel across regions carrying technical knowledge with them? the archaeological evidence remains incomplete. The second mystery concerns settlement planning. Surveys reveal that many structures appear to follow consistent orientations. This may seem insignificant today, but maintaining directional accuracy across multiple generations requires some method of measurement. Without compasses or formal surveying instruments, the inhabitants may have relied on solar observations, landscape markers, or inherited construction traditions. Similar questions have emerged at sites such as Çatalhöyük in Turkey and Skara Brae in Scotland, where surprisingly organised layouts challenge assumptions about early farming societies. The third mystery is perhaps the most fascinating of all: the underground storage pits and food preservation systems discovered throughout the settlement. At first glance, these pits appear simple. They are merely excavated holes in the ground. Yet, closer examination suggests that they may represent one of the most important technological achievements of prehistoric Europe. For early agricultural communities, food storage was a matter of survival. Harvests occurred only once per year, but people needed food every day. A failed storage system could mean famine, disease, and social collapse during winter. Many of the pits found at Libica Królewska display recurring shapes and dimensions, suggesting that their builders followed established design principles. Archaeologists have long noted that underground storage pits can create remarkably stable environmental conditions. Soil acts as a natural insulator, reducing temperature fluctuations compared with surface structures. Modern studies of underground grain storage have demonstrated that temperatures several feet below ground remain significantly more stable throughout the year. In parts of Europe, subsurface temperatures often fluctuate only a few degrees despite large seasonal changes above ground. Such stability slows spoilage and helps protect stored crops. The mystery is how Neolithic communities discovered these principles. Nobody recorded the experiments. No written manuals survive. Yet the evidence suggests that people understood how depth, shape, soil composition, drainage, and ventilation influenced preservation. Some pits appear deliberately positioned in locations with favourable drainage conditions. Others may have incorporated organic linings or coverings that improved storage performance. Researchers continue to investigate exactly how these systems functioned. The challenge becomes even more intriguing when compared with other ancient civilizations. In ancient Egypt, grain was stored in massive state-controlled granaries. In Mesopotamia, written records documented agricultural inventories. At Libica Królewska, however, similar storage goals were achieved without bureaucracies, writing systems, or monumental architecture. The technology itself was invisible. Unlike pyramids or temples, underground storage systems leave few traces behind, yet they may have been equally important to survival. A village capable of preserving grain through harsh winters could support larger populations, withstand poor harvests, and invest labour into construction, trade, and craft production. Some researchers argue that food storage technologies may have played a role in the rise of social complexity across prehistoric Europe. Communities capable of producing and preserving surplus resources gained advantages over neighbouring groups. If this interpretation is correct, the humble storage pits at Libica Królewska may represent an early form of agricultural engineering that helped transform European society. Even today, archaeologists cannot fully reconstruct the knowledge behind these systems. We can measure the pits, we can analyse pollen and plant remains, we can estimate storage capacity, but we still do not know exactly how generations of farmers refined these designs without written science. The fourth mystery involves long-distance exchange networks. Stone tools recovered at the site reveal that some raw materials originated far from the settlement itself. High-quality flint often travelled hundreds of kilometres across Central Europe. Such movement required routes, partnerships, and communication between distant communities. This creates a logistical puzzle. Transporting valuable stone across large distances without roads, carts, or organised states demanded considerable planning. Similar exchange networks have been documented throughout Neolithic Europe, but many details remain unknown. How did traders navigate? How was trust maintained between communities that may never have met before? What mechanisms protected valuable resources during transport? Archaeologists continue searching for answers. The fifth mystery concerns the remarkable precision of flint craftsmanship. Many recovered blades demonstrate extraordinary skill. Producing long, thin cutting edges from brittle stone requires precise control of force and angle. Modern experimental knappers often spend years mastering techniques that prehistoric artisans performed routinely. The existence of such expertise suggests specialized training, yet there is no evidence of schools, manuals, or written instruction. Knowledge must have been transmitted directly from person to person across generations. How this technical education functioned remains uncertain.